South Jersey's play-by-play home for the Eagles,
Touchdown!
Sixers,
and
Flyers.
He scored!
97.3 ESPN, WENJ, WENJ HD Millville, Atlantic City, a Town Square media station.
Josh Hennig filling in for Mike Gill on a Monday edition of the Sports Bash on 97.3 ESPN FM, 97.3 ESPN mobile app. It's free. Thanks to First Bank of Seattle City. We are live on YouTube at 97.3 ESPN. Mike Gill has the day off. I got you guys covered for the next 4 hours. Eagles win, but it wasn't pretty. More Ben Simmons rumors and news and reports we're going to catch you guys up on. NFL Week 16 almost in the books. Saints, Dolphins tonight. That's going to have an impact on the Eagles in multiple ways, no matter who wins the game tonight. And, of course, you guys can get involved as well. The text board is open at 609-403-0973. We are live on YouTube at 973 ESPN, where you can join the conversation as well. And, of course, you can hit us up through the 97.3 ESPN mobile app. Thanks to First Bank of Seattle City. Listen to the show, DM the show, check out all the latest news from 97.3 ESPN.com on the 97.3 ESPN mobile app. Like I said, we got a lot to get to. So let's try to get through some of the Eagles stuff here to open the show. Still to come, Mike McGarry from the Press of Atlantic City. Grayson's grades at 3 p.m. I'm very curious to hear what Scott Grayson's grades are, because I think that Eagles game was not a clean win from at least my two eyes yesterday. Football forward Jeff Mosher from Inside the Birds podcast and InsideTheBirds.com. Paul Hudrick from Liberty Ballers. We'll dig deeper into the latest Ben Simmons news and rumors with him. Casey Joyner, one thought on every game at 5 p.m. And at 5:30, Jeff Kerr from CBS Sports. As I mentioned, we hear from all of you guys throughout the day right here on 97.3 ESPN. Again, text board is open, 609-403-0973. DM the show through the 97.3 ESPN mobile app. It's free thanks to First Bank of Seattle City. We are live on YouTube at 973 ESPN. All right. So I mentioned at the top that was not a clean Eagles game. First of all, let's be realistic. No win is perfect. Very rarely do you have a flawless win in the NFL, especially in an era with so much ridiculous amount of parity. And a win is a win. The Eagles were supposed to beat the Giants, and they did beat the Giants. The Giants were pitiful yesterday. And frankly, if I'm the owner of the Giants, I need to make some difficult decisions about my franchise moving forward, because it's one thing to be down to your backup quarterbacks. It's another thing to play that pitifully on offense. That touchdown at the end was more of a, hey, we finally did it, than a actual touchdown kind of thing for the Giants. Their offense was so pathetic. It's hard for me to tell whose fault that is at this point, because the Giants are just such a mess. It's hard to know. So it's, on the flip side, difficult for me to give the Eagles defense too much credit. Look, the Eagles defense has played very well since week 8. Very, very well. So I'm not going to sit here and act like they're all bad. But if we're going to speak the truth and nothing but the truth, when I saw the news that Jonathan Gannon is a name being circulated as a top head coaching candidate, I kind of had to laugh, because since week 8, the Eagles defense is second in the NFC in points per game allowed, second in the NFC in yards per game allowed, second in the NFL in rush yards per game allowed. They're second in the NFC in third down defense. They're tied for first for the fewest defensive touchdowns allowed, and they're tied for third in forced fumbles. The problem with that is, since week 8, who have they played? They played Justin Herbert. They played Teddy Bridgewater, Trevor Siemian, Daniel Jones, Zach Wilson, Garrett Gilbert, and now the combination of Jake Fromm and Mike Lennon. I'm sorry, but am I really supposed to be that impressed? I'm not trying to poo-poo day after Eagles win, because to me, the Eagles offense did their job. It was a little ugly at times, stupid amount of drops, but you know what? For a team that was coming off of a quick turnaround, they did nothing for basically 16 days. Then they have a game. They got turned around in 4 games, play another game. I don't think they were too bad. But this Eagles team, who is now 8-7 and squarely in the playoff conversation after that win, thanks in part to the fact that the Vikings also losing. How about them apples? I mean, you're talking about a team that looked ugly yesterday. The Vikings didn't look too good either. And I'm having trouble rationalizing how they are going to actually be able to get to the playoffs. I'll get to that in a little bit later. But for the Eagles, you are now square in the playoff conversation. And as long as you keep winning, you're going to be there. You beat Washington next week. You bury Washington, and you basically put yourself in the front lane in pole position to go to the playoffs. And as Dominic Toretto says, it doesn't matter if you win by an inch or a mile. Winning is winning. But it doesn't mean I have to sit here and act like everything I saw yesterday was beautiful, because it wasn't. I don't care if the Eagles had 4 days or 16 days in between games. The drops by this team, by Dallas Goedert and Jalen Reagor and Miles Sanders, it's getting to the point where I think this team is an embarrassment in terms of catching. And this organization now has been through multiple head coaches, multiple wide receiver coaches, multiple players, and they still have this issue with concentration and catching the football when it's thrown to them. Mike Gill spoke about last week on the Sports Bash multiple times about how Dallas Goedert has a chance to be better than Zach Ertz. Well, I feel pretty comfortable saying Zach Ertz catches those balls that Dallas Goedert is dropping. I feel pretty comfortable saying that Jalen Reagor and Miles Sanders are both dropping balls that I have seen other wide receivers and other running backs catch. So I think that at this point in time, it's hard for me to condemn or bury or whatever you want to call it Jalen Hurts when his receivers aren't doing their job. The old saying by Bill Belichick, do your job. I am so tired of seeing people whose job they're paid to catch a football and they can't do it. Especially when the quarterback is putting it right on them. At some point, the Eagles have to have a long conversation about their skill position players. I don't think this offense, for as well as they've been as a running team offensively, is good enough. I love Devonta Smith. I like what I've seen from Quez Watkins. I'm happy to see Jordan Howard back out there, even though he left yesterday's game with a stinger. I think when Miles Sanders is healthy, he's a phenomenal part of this offense. The problem is, can he stay healthy? It appears now he has a broken bone in his hand, and we'll hear from Nick Sirianni, the head coach, later today about what his status is. Jalen Reagor, I think the jury is pretty much deliberated and come back with a verdict that he's just not the guy you thought he was when you drafted him. You drafted him with the idea that he was going to be in Doug Peterson's offense, that shot put kind of player, that Tyreek Hill, McCall Hardman type of player they have in Kansas City. Then you bring in Sirianni, he's supposed to be this wide receiver guru, this guy who knows wide receivers better than anybody else. Well, we're seeing great things from Quez Watkins, but we're not seeing it from Jalen Reagor. Travis Fulgham couldn't even cut it here. So maybe it is the players in some respect. Maybe it is the players around Hurts that is a problem at times. Because, listen, I don't want my receivers dropping the ball. If you can't catch the ball, you shouldn't be on the field. Greg Ward this year, all right, and I had to double check this stat the other day because I didn't believe this until I saw it. So Greg Ward has a couple of drops on the year. But here is Greg Ward's stat line for the season. He has 4 catches and 3 touchdowns. I understand Greg Ward is not a deep threat, but at this point, can we get more Greg Ward than Jalen Reagor? Because Rager's dropped more balls than Ward has, and I trust Ward running the route more than I trust Reagor. To me, the threat of the deep ball is just not good enough anymore. Having the best athletes on the field at this time of year is not good enough anymore. And if I'm Nick Sirianni and I'm Shane Steichen, I'm Kevin Patullo and all those offensive coaches, Brian Johnson, the quarterback coach, I'm sitting down and I'm saying, guys, we can't rationalize having this offense running to Reagor and Goddard as much as we have, because the honest question is, can you trust them to catch the ball? Josh Hennig filling in for Mike Gill here on a Monday edition of the Sports Bash. Eagles win yesterday. And by the way, the Eagles also covered the spread. Now, I bring that up because the Philadelphia Eagles, who were a team that previously were not beating teams they were supposed to, right? There's a point in time this year where you could have beat the 49ers, you didn't. And now your playoff destiny is in part in their hands. You could have beat the Raiders if you weren't so sloppy in the first half. You could have beat the Chargers if you played a more efficient game. You should have beat the Giants because you had more first downs, more third down conversions, more total yards than them, but you also had more turnovers, which is what doomed you in the end. So there's multiple games this year that this team should have won. But now, for 3 straight games, this team has covered the spread, which is saying to me that this team has finally decided it's put up or shut up time. Now, they're still starting out slow. They're still not a team that you can rely on the first quarter because I don't know why. I don't know if they just need time to warm up. I don't know if they're not focused in the first quarter, but Jalen Hurts for 3 straight games. Going back to the Giants game, his game against the Giants the first time, previous game versus Washington, and then this game versus the Giants. This is 3 straight games where he has been one quarterback in the first quarter and a completely opposite guy for the final 3 quarters. And you guys could tell me at 609-403-0973. You could DM the show through 973 ESPN mobile app. But I see messages coming in at YouTube on 973 ESPN. We'll get to those in just a little bit. This is a guy in Jalen Hurts that the players obviously believe in. They obviously look to him as their leader. But how am I supposed to efficiently judge a guy? How am I supposed to completely and totally tell you who Jalen Hurts is, aside from the intangibles that we all already know about, or at least we should know about? How am I supposed to do that if I see guys dropping the ball? I see the coach calling weird plays. I see him looking like one player in the first quarter and another player the rest of the game. What am I supposed to do with that? Because in a league where yesterday you go through the NFL schedule, and we'll blast through the full schedule a little bit later in the show, but you look through an NFL schedule where Kirk Cousins, for his second straight game, just laid an egg. He didn't look good. The Steelers looked horrible last night. Horrible. The Cowboys destroyed Washington to the point where Washington's players were fighting with each other on the bench. To be frank with you, I still don't know how the Raiders beat Denver, but it wasn't pretty. Atlanta barely beat a Detroit team with their backup quarterback, Tim Boyle. Meanwhile, the Bengals crushed Baltimore with their third-string quarterback. Buffalo basically outplayed the Patriots in Foxborough to the point where the Patriot fans were leaving early in the fourth quarter yesterday. The Jets and Jags, while they hit the over, just like I told you guys to do over the weekend, I told you guys to hit that over, and they did hit the over. The over was 42, over under. Well, guess what? 47 was the total. But that was even an ugly game. There's so many ugly games this weekend. And by the way, how did the Texans beat the Chargers? I don't know what the heck I was looking at in that game. I mean, the Chargers are the better team, and somehow Houston beats them. I feel like there's got to be someone in the Texans organization that is crying today because they're just plummeting down the list of having a top pick. You're now 4-11 if you're Houston. There's got to be a part of you that's like, why are we winning games again? But seriously, in an NFL where there's a lot of ugly football yesterday, it's hard for me to be hyper critical or a real apologist or a real give a ton of praise that Jalen Hurts on things that are not the intangibles, because I see an offense in the Eagles that is as good or no better than half the league. The NFL has so much parity right now. Half the teams look the same. Half the NFL is basically this. Quarterback who's not Tom Brady, Aaron Rodgers, Russell Wilson, on an offense with limited playmakers, with one strength and a horrible other weakness. That's the NFL now. Unless you have an elite quarterback, which there's only, 4 of them out there? 3 of them? It's Brady, Rodgers, Mahomes, Russell Wilson. Even Russell Wilson, I mean, he's struggling. I think he came back way too soon from that hand injury. I think it's greatly affecting his ability to be a consistent quarterback. But aside from those 4 guys, who do you really believe in as a quarterback? I mean, Joe Burrow has looked amazing at times this year, but I think he's still a year away from being the guy that people want to crown him at right now. I think he still is learning the game. I think Josh Allen had an amazing game yesterday. He may maybe playing himself into being a candidate for the MVP late in the season, but he's obviously had some very flawed games this year. And Dak Prescott finally broke out of his slump, whether he wants to admit it or not, and had an amazing game yesterday. There's so much parity in this league that when I watch the Eagles, on one hand, I'm exasperated with them, but on the flip side, I look at them and I say, you know what? You're like the rest of the league. Every team in the league looks the same almost now. So, like I said, it's hard to be hyper judgmental of this team. I feel like there's something to be said for the fact that this Eagles team is a good team, but they're not a great team. But frankly, there's very few great teams in the NFL today. And we are at the point where I think that we have to judge the Eagles as we judge the rest of the NFL. Unless you're one of the best teams, you're all basically the same. You all have strengths, you all have weaknesses. And when I watch the Eagles, I see an offense that has a great running game, that has limitations in the passing game, in part because of the receivers themselves. Can't catch the ball, can't run the route correctly. A defense that is capitalized on a weak schedule of opponents with guys like Jake Fromm and Garrett Gilbert on your schedule and Trevor Siemian. I think this league is about right place, right time. And I think that the Eagles are taking advantage of their schedule, and other teams are struggling because of their schedule. And when I see guys drop the ball yesterday, when I see Mike Lennon throw that touchdown to Evan Ingram at the end of the game, I'm excited the Eagles won. I love seeing them be successful. And I like the fact that Jalen Hurts has now shown multiple times this season that he can lead a team after a rough start to a game. But I'm not crowning the Eagles anything. Josh Hennig here on 97.3 ESPN, filling in for Mike Gill on the Sports Bash. This hour of the Sports Bash being brought to you by the Delaware Valley Acura dealers with new, fresh inventory arriving daily. Find your Acura today. Check out our Acura's award-winning lineup online at DelValAcuraDealers.com. Josh Hennig here, hanging out with you guys on a Monday Eagles win. What are your thoughts on the Eagles win yesterday? Again, I'm not trying to be a downer, but I saw some negatives in that game yesterday. And again, when I see Jonathan Gannon as a defensive candidate, a head coach candidate as a D coordinator, what is the league looking at? What is the league looking at right now? Seriously. What has Jonathan Gannon done that would make anyone be like, yeah, I want that guy to be my head coach? Here are the current rookie head coaches in the NFL this year. Nick Sirianni, 8-7. Brandon Staley, 8-7. Arthur Smith, 7-8. David Culley, 4-11. Robert Saleh, 4-11. Dan Campbell, 2-12-1. Urban Meyer was 2-11 before he was fired. Nick Sirianni and Brandon Staley are in very similar situations. They both coach teams that should have won some games, but they all lost those games that they should have won. Arthur Smith is very fortunate to have a 7-8 team, considering how poor his roster is. David Culley's in a no-win situation. He is just trying to play out the season to get through to next year. Robert Saleh is coaching a team without a lot of talent. Dan Campbell's doing the best he can with a garbage roster. And Urban Meyer is basically a scumbag who finally got bit for being a scumbag. So that's your rookie coaches this year. If I'm an NFL head coach, if I'm an NFL owner who's looking to fire my current coach, whether it's the Vikings with Mike Zimmer right now, if they don't make the playoffs, I feel comfortable saying that Zimmer probably does get fired. Whether you're the Jags trying to find your next head coach after firing Urban Meyer after just 13 games, whether you're a team like the Giants who may or may not fire Joe Judge, it's hard to tell what they're actually going to do up there with the Giants. You look around the NFL, if you're any team, the Raiders are going to hire a new head coach this offseason, right? They fired John Gruden halfway through the year. How can you in your right mind look at Jonathan Gannon or any coordinator right now that's not named like Eric Bieniemy and be like, yeah, that's the guy. That's the guy that I really want. Because I certainly can't. I feel like most of these coordinators are either overrated or they're overhyped or something. Because I look around the NFL and it's becoming more and more obvious that for as much emphasis as we put on coaches, the players got to play the game. And Sirianni is lucky they have 8 wins this year, considering at times how poor of a job Jonathan Gannon has done, how many drops they have on the year by the receivers, some of his own poor play calling. I love the fact the Eagles doubled their wins from last year. This is still a flawed team in a flawed league. Parity at this point has gone from being a good thing to something you just shrug your shoulders about and you move on. Text board is open at 609-403-0973. I'll get to you guys' messages over on the YouTube channel at 973 ESPN. And, of course, your DMs over on the 973 ESPN mobile app. It's free. Thanks to First Mega CLC. Live in the Matt Black Kia Studios, I'm Josh Hennig, filling in for Mike Gill here on the Sports Bash.
Now, back to the Sports Bash on 97.3 ESPN.
Hurts looking. Hurts is still looking. He is going deep, and it is Quez Watkins coming down with the football inside the 10. Quez Watkins beating Julian Love.
Yeah, Jalen Hurts had a few deep bombs yesterday during that game. Eagles win. You heard it right here on 97.3 ESPN, your home for Eagles, Sixers, and Flyers in South Jersey. Of course, all of our Eagles, Sixers, Flyers coverage, as well as high school sports over at 97.3 ESPN.com and the 97.3 ESPN mobile app. I want to hear from some of you guys right now before we get to Mike McGarry a little bit later in the hour. Plus, Grayson's grades at 3 p.m. still to come. All part of a busy 4 hours here on 97.3 ESPN. Over on the text board at 609-403-0973, texter chimes in and says, the NFL is like all major sports, has too many teams. Talent pool is severely diluted, which is why they all look the same. That's certainly part of it, texter. I do agree that there being so many teams definitely dilutes the talent pool. But I don't think that any way that should vacate or abdicate or escape the responsibility of the players to play better at times. You're making millions of dollars. You're playing in the NFL. You know, you look at all the people who are still mad at Ben Simmons because the guy's basically a millionaire. There's rumors that he blew most of his money and he doesn't want to play in Philadelphia. He's basically a baby. He's crying about it, right? People don't want to hear that. You're playing in the big leagues. You should play like you play in the big leagues. Listen, everyone has talent if you're playing in the NFL. Every former player I've ever spoken with in my entire life of any sport, former NFL players, former NBA, NHL, baseball, MMA fighters, boxers, the whole 9 yards, everyone says to a person that the average person doesn't understand how much talent is at the professional level of a sport. You know, I spent the entire last year covering the PFL, the number 2 MMA organization in the world behind the UFC. The talent in the PFL is not that different than the UFC. It's just that certain people only can execute at a certain level in certain situations. So I agree that the talent pool is not as rich as it would be with less teams, but it doesn't, detract from the reality that if you're playing in the NFL and you're a receiver, catch the football. Get some messages over on the YouTube channel. Born Again chimes in over on YouTube, says Quez Watkins has caught 36 of his 37 passes to touch his hands. Goddard is a freak athlete, but he has bad mental lapses. Hopefully experience can nullify that. I mean, you would hope experience can nullify it, but here's the problem with Goddard. I think that he has experience. He was drafted in 2018? Second round pick. So he has 2019, 2020, 2021. How much more experience does he need? I understand that Tony Gonzalez was not Tony Gonzalez year 1 or year 2 of his career, but this is year 3 for Goddard. By this time next year, if we're still talking about drops and mental lapses for Dallas Goedert, I'm concerned because, as I said earlier, I never saw Zach Ertz make these drops. Talked about Jonathan Gannon earlier in the show. Dom chimes in over on the YouTube channel and says, Gannon is coached so conservatively this year. I wonder if head coach rumblings have something to do with it. He coaches like he's going to be fired if he allows 2 deep bombs because he blitzed. I think Gannon has 2 problems, Dom. And the 2 problems are this. Number one, I think Gannon's coaching philosophy is not as flexible as he claims it to be. He wants to have a very flexible, a very pliable defense. But the reality is that Gannon himself is not very flexible or pliable. He needs to have Fletcher Cox standing next to him on the sideline telling him things in order to make the right call sometimes. It's a very strange dynamic with Gannon because sometimes he has a great game plan. other games. He wasn't around there. That passive defense, as you mentioned, is so conservative that it makes you want to sick. As someone who used to play defense myself, I never was good at catching the ball. I was good at running around and hitting people. Okay. And for me, playing football, defense is about being aggressive, about setting the tone. It's about asserting your physical dominance on the opponent. And Gannon, as you said, seems more concerned about giving up the deep ball than he is about actually execute. Execute. It's very frustrating. Dave Trudell chimes in over on the YouTube and says, how would you feel if Mike Zimmer would come and be our defense coordinator and is Wade Phillips still coaching? Wade is currently retired. It's semi-forced retirement because the Rams pretty much shoved him out the door out there in Los Angeles after a few years, which was a very strange situation. And now the Rams are on their third D coordinator since. After they got rid of Wade, they made Brandon Staley the coordinator, and Staley let do the Chargers coach. Now I believe it's Raheem Morris out there. So, very weird situation. I don't even know if Wade wants to coach anymore. You got to think, how old is Wade Phillips? Let me look it up real quick before I hit the break here. Wade Phillips is 74 years old. At what age are you just looking around? You're like, I don't want to deal with this anymore. I don't want to deal with these players. I don't want to deal with the work hours. At what point in Wade's life did he say, you know what? I've made a lot of money in my coaching career. I got a Super Bowl ring. I've coached in multiple Super Bowls. I've had a good life, man. I got to move on. I'm just saying, I'm not saying that's what Wade's thinking. I'm just saying there's a part of looks at Wade and says, does he really want to deal with this anymore? Zimmer's a very interesting thing because I think Mike Zimmer is overrated as an NFL head coach. It's been so long since he was a D coordinator. I don't know how Zimmer feels about that. Let me double check. Well, that's got to be what, 10, 12 years ago as a coordinator? Let's see here. Yeah, it was 2013. Okay. So it wasn't as long as I thought. But he was a coordinator in Cincinnati for all those years. Then he was in Atlanta. Then he was in Dallas. I mean, you've been a head coach now in the NFL for 8 seasons. Do you really want to be the guy who's out there dealing with this stuff anymore? I don't know. I always wonder how these coaches feel after they hit to a certain level, after they get to a certain point. Mike Zimmer's not young. He's 65. Now, maybe Zimmer will be like, after he's no longer a head coach, maybe he's the kind of person who says, you know what? I want to get back to my coaching roots. But you go back through Zimmer's coaching career as a D coordinator. He had some great years in Cincinnati. He had some solid years in Dallas. Now, it's hard to tell with Dallas how much of that was him, how much that was Parcells, the players that he brought in at that point. Zimmer's an interesting name. That's a good pull by David. We got more text to get to. We got more messages to get to throughout the show. Keep them coming. Text board 609-403-0973. 609-403-0973. You can DM the show through the 973 ESPN mobile app. And as always, you can chime in like the others have. Guys like Born Again and Dom and David on the YouTube channel as well at 973 ESPN. Coming up next, Mike McGarry to talk about what has happened in the sports weekend. I'm Josh Hennig, filling for Mike Gill here on 97.3 ESPN FM, the 97.3 ESPN mobile app. It's free thanks to Sports Bank and CLC, and we are live on YouTube at 973 ESPN. Josh Hennig back here, filling in for Mike Gill here on a Monday edition. Eagles win yesterday. As I said earlier, it wasn't the most aesthetically pleasing win, that's for sure. To talk about more of that, as well as the busy sports weekend, Mike McGarry from the Press of Atlantic City joins the Sports Bash every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. His appearance being brought to you by Calvi Electric, now offering residential services for your home and business. Visit them online at calvielectric.com. Mike McGarry joining us right now on the phone line here on 97.3 ESPN. Mike, how was your weekend?
Oh, pretty good. Great Christmas weekend. A lot of sports on, so nothing but positive stuff and good cheer going on, except for the Giants' performance yesterday, which kind of put the Scrooge in Christmas, I would say.
Well, Mike, that gets to my first question, which is, I understand a win's a win, and I'm not dismissing the Eagles. You got to win the game you're supposed to win. But how am I supposed to judge an Eagles team that is now beaten basically a bad Jets team, a bad Giants team, and a Washington football team with the JV roster out there?
Well, if you're a good football team, you take advantage of those opportunities, right? I think you got to give the Eagles credit for that. I mean, yesterday the score was 3-3 at halftime, but in the second half, the Eagles came out and dominated the football game. So, I mean, that's what kind of good or better than average football teams do. They take advantage of the opportunities presented to themselves. And right now the Eagles are doing that. And, they deserve credit for that. I don't think anybody, I definitely did not think that they would be in position right now to qualify for the playoffs, and they basically control their own fate, and they deserve all the credit in the world for that.
When you look at the Eagles, this is also another game that they started out slowly, and it seems like Jalen Hurts is one player in the first quarter. He's a completely different player the rest of the game. And after all the drops yesterday, after all the issues this team, Mike, how do we judge the Eagles offense, considering that there are times that Jalen Hurts throws the ball and guys just drop it and they're wide open?
Yeah, I mean, they did have a slow start yesterday. They did have some drops. You could say that Hurts kind of struggled early, but I think you got to look at the overall four-quarter results. I think to go pass by pass with Jalen Hurts right now and almost possession by possession is really not fair to them. You've got to take a look at the overall big picture. And what you saw yesterday is a quarterback who can continue to make some throws. Does he make every throw? No. He can hurt teams with his legs, and they're putting points on the board. And, you watch Tom Brady play. Tom Brady throws some bad passes. Great wide receivers drop balls. So you can't expect the Eagles to be perfect on every possession and kind of overreact when they don't. I think you've got to look at an offense right now, that put up, a good amount of points. Yes, they put up a good amount of points around Washington. They're not scoring on every drive, but to expect them to is unrealistic.
Now, on the flip side, as I mentioned with the offense, I'm having trouble judging them at times. I'm having trouble judging the defense too. There's conversation out there that Jonathan Gannon's going to be a head coach candidate. But, Mike, how am I supposed to say a guy's going to be a head coach candidate when I'm not even sure he's a good coordinator?
Well, I mean, defensively is another matter. You saw a defense that kind of did not play well. They didn't play well. They played against a Giants offense that was inept at best. So I'm not going to give the Eagles defense credit for yesterday. I thought they did play well last Tuesday against Washington. They got some good players. I think overall, Josh, you just got to look and judge the Eagles by their record, where they are. Right now, they're a playoff team in the NFC. And are they a Super Bowl contending team? I don't think so, but they are a playoff team right now, and I think they're a better than average team in the NFC. And to me, they're a team heading in the right direction because of the adjustments the coaching staff has made this season.
Mike McGarry from the Press of Atlantic City joining us here on the Sports Bash on 97.3 ESPN. Josh Hennig filling for Mike Gill on a Monday. Eagles with the win, got the game they're supposed to win. They are 8-7 now. Mike, they have doubled their win total from last year to this year. And I want to know from you, your perspective, how much of that is the coaching? How much of that is the player development? Where do you put your finger on of who deserves the credit for the doubling of the wins from last year to this year?
Well, I think it's the coaching staff, and it's also the development of Jalen Hurts. I think Jalen Hurts is much better now in game 18 of his career than he is in game 4 of his career last year. And I think you've got to look at what Sirianni has done as far as, the changes he made in season, starting to emphasize the run more, changing the way he called games. Like I said, I mean, look at around the league at the other first-year coaches, right? The Jets guy, they have 4 wins. Sirianni has come in and doubled the amount of wins, like you said, that they've had from last year. That's tremendous achievement. I didn't think they were going to be able to do that. And I think I think he deserves all the credit in the world. And I do think that fans are a little bit too hard on him. Like yesterday, when they start slowly, there's drops, always throwing the ball too much. He's doing this, he's doing that. I sometimes think people need to take a step back and have a little faith and not judge it possession by possession, although that's easy to do, and in some cases play by play, and look at the whole 4 quarters when it's done. Because if you look at the whole 4 quarters yesterday when it was done, the Eagles looked pretty impressive, although against, and this pains me to say it, an inept New York football team.
Well, I want to ask you about that inept New York football team. Mike, if you're the owner of the Giants or the Giants owner calls you right now, if Mr. Mara jumps on the phone and says, Mike McGarry, what do I do with this football team? What do you recommend to him? Because the Giants are a mess.
Yeah, they need a whole new direction, right? I mean, the GM Gettleman is probably going to retire, so they're going to have a new GM. There's some talk that guy might come from inside the organization. I understand there's sort of reluctance to change coaches again with Joe Judge, but boy, you have performances like yesterday's, and it's just hard to stomach Joe Judge returning. Daniel Jones coming back at quarterback. I understand that one. He's been hurt. He's going into the last year of his rookie contract. Maybe you give him one more year. You don't want to start over. But the Giants are a team that definitely needs a breath of fresh air, because as I tweeted yesterday, I thought that loss yesterday for the Giants was as bad as the Joe Pisarcik Miracle of the Meadowlands 1 fumble game. And that game sort of changed the direction of the Giants franchise. It was that game that led them to hire George Young as GM, and that eventually led to Bill Parcells becoming coach and began a giant run of 20-something years where they went to 5 Super Bowls and won 4 of them. So the Giants right now need that sort of change of direction, and yesterday's game proved it. And the question now is the owner willing to make that change?
Well, the other question I have, Mike, is which change makes the most sense? Because you mentioned Joe Judge. I feel like every Giants fan I run into hates Gettleman on some level. And I don't even know what the answer is, because you look around the league, hiring a new coach, hiring a GM doesn't always fix everything.
Well, there you go, and that's the problem, and that's why I come back to the Eagles, and they say, well, what do you think about Sirianni? And I say Sirianni has doubled your win total. Look at how many teams are on that coach's carousel. Right now, the Giants are on that carousel where they're changing coaches. If they did get rid of Judge, it would be the 3rd straight time they've gotten rid of coach after 2 years. That's why when I hear Eagles fans say, who should be the starting quarterback next year, I say Jalen Hurts, because otherwise you're on that carousel where you have a different starting quarterback and you're starting over every season. And that's nowhere fun place to be. That's where the Giants are right now, and that's no place to be.
Mike McGarry from the Press of Atlantic City, at AC Press McGarry on Twitter. You can follow him on there. Check out all of his coverage of all the sports, high school, pro sports, everything at thepressofatlanticcity.com. Mike, before I let you go, I want to get your thoughts on the Woj Christmas Day report. Woj goes on national TV and says that he expects the Sixers to re-engage with teams, and he names some names, whether it's Minnesota, Indiana, Sacramento, and he said he wouldn't be surprised if the Cavs get involved. Your reaction to all of that is what?
My reaction is something has to happen before the February deadline, because the 76ers cannot afford to play shorthanded all season and write off this year. They just can't do it. They can't have a guy $30 million in salary sit on the sidelines all season when you have Joel Embiid. When you have Joel Embiid, you cannot waste a Joel Embiid season. Therefore, you must get him some help and try to make a run at it. Who knows what's going to happen? It's unpredictable times in the NBA. If you get healthy for the playoffs and you get some Joel Embiid some help, who knows what will happen. But what I do know right now is the Sixers, as presently constituted, are not a threat to win the NBA championship. And you have to trade Ben Simmons. You have to get Embiid some help, or else you're writing off the whole year. And I don't know, as a professional franchise, you can do that.
Mike McGarry, President of Atlantic City, joined us here thanks to Calvi Electric. Mike, appreciate you jumping on the phone. I'll let you go back inside to watch Howell versus Middle Township.
Right. Coming down the wire here. Exciting one, Josh. I will talk to you on Wednesday. Thanks.
Mike McGarry joined us on the phone line here on 97.3 ESPN. Yes, his appearance Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays on the Sports Bash being brought to you by Calvi Electric, now offering residential services for your home and business. Visit them online at calvielectric.com. You know, on that Ben Simmons point, before we hit the next break, you know, I see a lot of people every time a Ben Simmons story comes out says, I'm tired of this. I just want to trade it. I don't care anymore. But the reality is that in the real world, this is how things work. Things don't happen overnight. You know, we all have heard the saying, Rome wasn't built in a day, right? This idea that, you know, I'm tired, the Sixers need to trade him. Well, Sixers are in the process of negotiating. Sixers are trying to find that middle ground between the super high price tag that they asked for initially and the teams who lowballed them initially. And as Woj reports, you can see the full report over at 97.3 ESPN.com. He says, look, teams didn't want to make trades right now because there are so many COVID issues. Teams are trying to get players on the court. Now the players are starting to return. They're going to start having those conversations again. By the way, a little bit later in the show, we will give you the Nick Sirianni press conference, as well as Football at 4 with Jeff Mosher. More Sixers talk with Paul Hudrick, Liberty Ballers at 4:40. But coming up next, Grayson's grades over at 97.3 ESPN.com. We'll ask Scott Grayson his thoughts on the Eagles after their win over the Giants. I'm Josh Hennig, filling for Mike Gill, 97.3. Josh Hennig filling in for Mike Gill here on a Monday edition of the Sports Bash. Eagles win. They are 8-7. They doubled their team total of wins from last year. To get into that and more right now as he joins us after every Eagles game day, Scott Grayson and his Grayson's Grades are brought to you by Boardwalk Honda. From Maine to Miami, nobody beats a Boardwalk deal online at boardwalkhonda.com. Eagles win. But as I said earlier, folks, it wasn't the most aesthetically pleasing win, to say the least. And we'll get more into his grades right now. Scott Grayson joins us right now here on 97.3 ESPN. Scott, good to see you. How you doing today?
Doing just fine, Josh. How are you?
I'm doing well. And I kind of want to start, I preview coming in here. A win's a win, right? You're supposed to beat the bad teams. But, Scott, that was not exactly the cleanest win in the world. And this is multiple times now. This team, they start a game one way, they finish another way. I understand it's a 4-day turnaround. I understand the game before was a 16-day layoff, but at some point, you can't play that way against the better teams in the NFL, Scott.
No, I mean, if this team does get in the playoffs, which it's starting to look more and more like they're going to do, you can't start games like this against playoff teams and expect that you're going to be able to come back and play one half of football and win a game. It's just not going to happen. So, yes, it's nice to see that this team never really feels like it's out of it, that they kind of have that mentality like they're going to play and eventually win this game. But you can't continue to do the things they're doing and think you're going to come out with a playoff victory. It's just not going to happen. That being said, they are making corrections. They are doing things better within the game, but you can't start as slow as they have lately and continue to find yourselves winning football games. It's just not going to happen.
I like what I've seen from Jalen Hurts in the last two games. I like the fact that he's figured it out. He's gotten better as the games went along. But one of my problems right now, Scott, is, and I understand that you gave Jalen Hurts an A, but it's hard for me to even give Hurts a grade when I see guys dropping balls, when I see, guys, it almost seems like sometimes Rager runs the wrong route at times, for goodness sake. Like, I don't even know. It's hard to judge a guy when the talent around him is not doing their job.
It is, and I have a hard time penalizing Jalen Hurts when he's hitting guys in the hands. If these are bad throws that are bouncing off their feet, or hitting them in the top of the helmet, or these are well thrown balls, and and it's really hard to evaluate them. What this team is doing early in games with the 3 drops all in the first half, I think 2 in the first quarter. You really can't get this offense going with that happening, and you can't pin that on the quarterback. That's on the players themselves. And you're right, it's happened now 2 weeks in a row with Dallas Goedert dropping passes. That's a bit of a concern for me. That's not like him. And yes, he has settled down and made plays later on in the game, but those plays are there early when you're trying to set a tone. And we talked about how they can't continue to start like this. Well, that's one of the biggest reasons why they're doing that. And he's got to look that ball into his hands before he starts trying to go downfield. We all know he can do a lot of good things in the open field with the ball, but he's got to catch that ball first. And that, to me, is something that I would preach to him this week, is say, look, that's 2 weeks in a row now. Yes, you have produced, elsewhere within the game, but you cannot continue to hurt this team early on by dropping those passes. And he wasn't the only one, to be fair. It was a little contagious amongst other guys as well, but that can't happen. Miles Sanders had one. I think Jalen Reagor did have one as well. Those drops can't happen, and it is hard to evaluate Jalen Hurts. But one of the things that I really like about Hurts is he does always, we've talked about this a couple times, he stays level-headed, very even keel. He cannot run with that ball loose, and he's continued to have these fumble issues, which is the one thing that I would say he needs to absolutely correct. But if you look yesterday and the week before, what I like that Jalen Hurts did, and he was forced to do it because of his physical limitations from his ankle injury, he's not as mobile right now. He doesn't have that escapability that he's had. So he's had to kind of work on staying in the pocket, looking downfield, working off of different targets. And I really like the ball that he threw to Quez Watkins. That was a well-thrown ball, put where his guy could go up and get it. And Quez Watkins made a good play on that. Another well-thrown ball in the corner of the end zone where only Devontae Smith could make it. And Devontae Smith was one of the few receivers that could have even made that catch in the entire league. And so there's things Jalen Hurts is doing well, There's things I like that he's doing. I love his leadership capability. But there's things that he really needs to clean up himself as well. He can't fix the drops. That's on the other guys. But he's got to be careful when he leaves that pocket. He's got to protect that football. They cannot afford those turnovers.
You mentioned the issue with the turnovers. One of the other problems we saw yesterday was the penalties. The penalties are back. That was a huge issue at the beginning of the year. Then they seemed to kind of like figure it out. They got better. They got more tight. And I understand some people are trying to say, well, it was a 4-day turnaround after a 6. Scott, at some point, you just got to stop. Like, you're a professional football player. You gotta not make dumb plays, right? And I just don't understand how this team went from being cleaning almost the entire penalty issue up to now all of a sudden against a miserable Giants team just imploding for penalties all of a sudden.
Yeah, well, it looked to me like they started to run and try to run some of those plays they threw out of the playbook from earlier in the year. Devontae Smith getting called for blocking too early on a screen pass, and those are mental penalties. Those are mental mistakes. You start blocking that guy too soon, you can't do that. And so what I saw was them trying to put that stuff back into the playbook, but the same problem still existing. That's something that you either have to decide you're going to rip it up and throw it away for good, or you've really got to come back on that with a young receiver and say, listen, I'd rather that guy come off of you and make a play than you get called for a penalty. It just backs him up. The penalty in that situation is just uncalled for. And then you had Javon Hargrave, I believe, possibly Derek Barnett as well. I forget who exactly on the defensive side of the ball. Neutral zone, infractions. Again, those are mental mistakes that can't happen. During this good football they've been playing, that hasn't been happening. The penalties have really come down. They've been limited. And so they need to be careful of that, because, yes, that is one way that this offense could really, struggle and has struggled in the past. Penalties are the thing that derails it big time. And on the defensive side of the ball, that has been one of their Achilles heels in the past as well. If you look back in the first half of the season, offenses were moving the ball because the defense was giving up penalties at bad times. And it kind of happened a little bit yesterday in those situations. Now, the Giants aren't a good enough team to make you pay for it. But again, against a good football team, against a playoff team, those kind of things can really lead to you packing up your locker and heading into the offseason.
Scott Grayson joining us for another edition of Grayson's Grades here on 97.3 ESPN. The full list of grades over at 97.3ESPN.com. Scott, one of the guys you point out in the grades is Quez Watkins. I want to ask you about him because one of the things that I've been wondering for weeks now is, I don't know if this team has enough talent, you know what I mean, around the quarterback at this point. I love Devonta Smith. I like Dallas Goedert. When Miles Sanders is healthy, he's really good. I think Quez Watkins is earning himself that spot in among the guys who are going to be here next year, are going to be contributors, because for a guy to go up and get the ball like he did yesterday, that shows one, right? That shows a guy really desires to be there and be productive and be part of this team.
I agree. And I've continued to want to see Quez Watkins take some snaps away from Jalen Reagor. Watkins' explosive speed has been nice. When they let him show it off and use it, it has been a great asset for him. On that one play, like we're talking about, that was a one-on-one ball. I mean, that ball was there for, the defender to go get, and he kind of allowed Watkins to kind of slip in front of him and high point the ball. And when you do that, you're going to make plays. I like Watkins' hands. I like his speed. I like his burst. He doesn't seem to have the drops issues like Jalen Reagor has had. But, look, that being said, I think that's a good position battle. I would really like to see them go out in free agency and find somebody to put opposite free agency, not the draft, opposite Devontae Smith on, to have like a good 1 or 2, 1A, 1B kind of guy on the outside. Let Quez Watkins and Jalen Reagor fight over that slot position, because and maybe they both, utilize some time at that spot. I think that would be a great thing for them. I like the way Quez Watkins is going out there. He's a competitor. The question is whether Jalen Reagor is going to feel that competitive juice flowing and try to maybe get pushed himself. I think that's what the Eagles are hoping, is that Reagor gets pushed by Watkins and ultimately finally turns into the guy that they think he can be when they drafted him first round. I don't think any of us have seen that. I think we're seeing more productive play out of Quez Watkins, like that one ball we're talking about. And I would like to see, frankly, a couple more targets go his way. I'm not necessarily a big fan of the screen pass to Devontae Smith. Give me a screen to Watkins. Give me a screen to Goddard. Give me a screen to Miles Sanders. But I don't want to see, some of those screen passes. Jalen Reagor doesn't know how to run it. He doesn't run it well. Quez Watkins can do some of that. So I think there's things there, and I think they're looking to try to see what they can do in the offseason with him. He's not an expensive receiver to keep on the roster right now, obviously. Neither is Jalen Reagor. So that's why I'd like to see those two guys maybe compete a little bit for some of that. But I do want to see them in free agency. Find somebody opposite Devontae Smith to become another threat out there and build around the quarterback, like you said. I think that's one of the key needs this team has.
Scott, let's flip over to the defense, because another area I'm conflicted on is, listen, the Eagles beat a team they should beat, and the Giants' offense pretty much stinks. Between Jake Fromm and Mike Glennon, they might be the two of the worst backup QBs in the league right now. I mean, the Giants just don't have a lot going on for them. But at the same time, Gannon, listen, you're supposed to beat this team. So how much credit do we give him, considering that for the last several weeks he's played Jake Fromm and Garrett Gilbert and Trevor Siemian and Zach Wilson on a pretty bad Jets team? I mean, is Gannon's defense better, or is he just playing worse offenses?
I just think that his defense is suited right now to beat bad quarterbacks. We look back earlier in the season, and, quite frankly, that's one of the things I want to see out of a playoff matchup is, has Gannon learned anything or not? Because these bad quarterbacks they're going up against, you don't have to do too much to win these games. They did have to stuff the run, and this defense did a great job of shutting down the run and forcing these quarterbacks from and Glennon to have to try to win the game with their arm, which they clearly are not capable of doing. So that game plan worked. And there's, but it's still, I'm still seeing a passive game plan. And you don't need to go and blitz these guys because they're going to make mistakes on their own. When they go and they play better quarterbacks, that's when they're going to have a problem. And that's where they did have a problem with Gannon's defense. And that's where I'm eager and curious to see what happens if they do get into the playoffs. Is, does he call a different game? Does he set up this defense differently than they did against some of the quarterbacks they played in the first half of the season? Because quite frankly, I thought he was way too passive. I think that's been one of the Achilles heels for this defense. They've got a good front four, but they don't do a whole lot to help them get to the quarterback. He expects them to get there on their own. The cushion, the coverage they've been giving up at times is earlier in the season was too far. Now I am seeing Slay play better, and they're letting him, I think, do more of what he does well. You see Rodney McLeod getting to freelance a little more, I think. So quite frankly, Josh, that's one of the biggest unknowns in my mind is, has Gannon evolved? And against these bad quarterbacks, we just can't tell yet.
When you look at the Eagles' next few games, obviously got to play Washington again, but they expect Taylor Heineke to be back for that game. So at least the quarterback position will be a little better. And then you got Dallas, and Dallas looked like gangbusters last night. So to me, based on what you said, I'm hoping that Dallas has something to play for the final week of the season, because I think that would be a wonderful test to see, did you learn anything from the last Dallas matchup? Is this defense going to stick to their guns? Because to me, I think a big part of the reason why Darius Slay, or Big Play Slay, as he's like to be called now, is a Pro Bowler is because Gannon is letting him be him. You know what I mean? He's not holding him back anymore. I don't know if Gannon kept playing Slay in that passive zone that he would be in the Pro Bowl.
No, I agree with you. And Slay's been able to look. He should have had an interception yesterday. If the sun didn't get in his eyes, I guess. I mean, he was right there. You look at that, and I agree with you that if that Dallas game means something, we start to see something. Clearly, Dak Prescott's a better quarterback than some of the guys that they've had to face lately. We don't know if that game's going to mean anything for Dallas. Heck, there's a chance the Eagles could clinch next week themselves, and it might not mean anything for them. So who knows what we're going to find out about that game in particular. But yes, I think there has been my suspicion, and I don't know anything for sure, but it certainly seems like some of these veteran players like Fletcher Cox, Hargrave, Slay, perhaps even a McLeod, went to Gannon and said, listen, this is what we do well. This is what we feel we do well. Can you give us an opportunity within your defense to do those things? And it seems like there was a little bit of a give and take that went on. And so I'm curious to see whether, again, I'm curious to see what kind of evolution there's been in that defense against a better offense. And, I don't know what we're going to see from Washington. I know they're still, trying to come back from the COVID thing. They had a fist fight on the sidelines last night. I think if you can get up early on that team, you're going to start to see them quit, like they did last night. And I don't know really what you learned about Dallas last night. I mean, Dallas basically just showed the ability to get up and then step on the throat. And I think Washington's pretty much quitting at this point, which is not the kind of identity that Ron Rivera tends to keep with his team. So I don't know what kind of personality they're going to come out with. And of course, they had to play against the Eagles not that long ago on the Tuesday night, less than a week ago. And so these are two familiar opponents. But, I'm curious to see what Gannon does in this game in particular, because this is one yet again where now they got to go on the road. But if you can get up early on a team, and if your defense can continue to shut down an offense like they did against the Giants, until the Eagles offense was finally able to get going, that's what I want to see out of this defense right now. You do have to give them credit. They're not giving up a lot of points right now. And I know it's not against great quarterbacks, but that's the key to being able to give your offense time to get going. And look, this defense is scoring some points. Singleton with the pick six. Darius Slay's had some big play. Slay's had some scores of his own earlier in this season. So, this defense is doing some things well. Again, I'm just really curious to see what they do against a good quarterback, because we haven't had the chance to evaluate that for a while.
Scott, before I let you go, I want to ask you, the Eagles are now 8-7. They doubled their win total from last year. And to me, I always felt this team would win at least 7 games, because to me, I thought Carson Wentz himself lost 3 games for you last year. So I always felt that 7 wins made sense. Now that they've doubled the win total, and now Sirianni, compared to other rookie coaches, okay, him and Brandon Staley are both 8-7. Arthur Smith 7-8, which I don't know how he's done them with the Falcons. The Falcons are just a bad roster. And then you got guys like David Culley, Robert Saleh, 4-11, Dan Campbell. The Lions are fighting, but they're just not a good team. Urban Meyer, I mean, he's just done. I mean, I don't think we ever see Urban Meyer on the sideline ever again anywhere, unless maybe like Youngstown State. But what do you evaluate Sirianni at this point? I know you gave him an A for the last game, but 8-7. What do you rate that to? How does Sirianni rate on the year at this point?
Sirianni's impressed me from the standpoint of, there was a time after, I don't remember if it was the Tampa loss or the Dallas loss on that Monday night. I think it was a Monday night. That one was brutal, that I questioned whether he was going to lose the locker room. And, I clearly was wrong. He was able to rally this team. He's been able to get these veterans. The key to keeping a team together is if you keep the veterans together, the veterans will keep the young guys together. And it just kind of goes and feeds itself. He didn't lose the veterans. He kept them buying in. And I think that's a big credit to, one of the big differences perhaps between him and some of the other coaches you just named. They've lost their teams. Urban Meyer clearly lost his team in Jacksonville, but his conduct off the field didn't help. I think Nick Sirianni deserves a lot of credit for keeping this team together. And continuing to work towards pushing the ball down the hill the right way. And they've done a lot of good things in the process. I think he also deserves a lot of credit for frankly ripping up his playbook in the first few games and getting away from the pass, which is what he thought, I think, Jalen Hurts needed to be successful, and allow that run game with this offensive line. And again, I give this coaching staff credit. Like I said, I suspect that there's been some of that on the defensive side of the ball. We do this well, let us do it. I think this offensive line might have gone to Sirianni as well and said, we can run block. Give the ball to these guys and let them follow us. We will do this. And I think there's some of that give and take, and that's a credit to a good coaching staff, perhaps a young coaching staff more willing to do that than an older one. And these guys being young and somewhat inexperienced, I think allowed their veterans leadership to mean something. They listened to them, and it's kind of fed itself. And this team has evolved from that. I think it's created a positive situation here. And I think Nick Sirianni, frankly, he's not going to get coach of the year. But if this team gets into the playoffs, which it looks like they might, he's got to be considered, and he's got to finish up there in the top part of the voting, in my opinion, because this team was, like I said, I questioned whether there was going to be finger pointing in that locker room and that he was going to lose that locker room, because it was back when he was talking about fertilizing a plant and all that kind of stuff. And you're sitting here going, really? You think that's what this team needs to hear? So I've been overall pretty impressed with Nick Sirianni. And frankly, I'm excited to see where this team goes with his leadership.
He's Scott Grayson, the full Grayson's grades at 97.3 ESPN.com. Follow him on Twitter at Grayson, S. Grayson, Fox 29. And of course, you can catch him on Fox 29. His work at 97.3 ESPN.com. He joins us every Monday or whenever the Eagles play at this point because, the Eagles have played on a Sunday, they played on a Monday, they played on a Tuesday, they played on a Thursday. Scott's pretty much been on almost every day this week on the Sports Bash. Scott, hope you had a great Christmas, and we will see you on the other side of the new year.
All right, you got it, Josh. Same to you.
Josh Hennig here, filling in for Mike Gill on the Sports Bash on 97.3 ESPN. And of course, Grayson's Grades brought to you by Boardwalk Honda. From Maine to Miami, nobody beats a Boardwalk deal online at boardwalkhonda.com. Coming up next, you'll hear from Nick Sirianni, the Eagles head coach. He has updates on Miles Sanders, Jordan Howard, and more, and some changes to the COVID protocols. Find out all that next from Eagles head coach Nick Sirianni, live right here on the Sports Bash. Josh Hennig filling for Mike Gill on 97.3 ESPN FM, the 97.3 ESPN mobile app, and we are live on YouTube at 973 ESPN.
Now, back to more Sports Bash with Mike Gill on 97.3 ESPN, South Jersey's sports leader.
Josh Hennig back here, filling for Mike Gill live in the Matt Black Kia Studios here on 97.3 ESPN. Of course, my appearance here on 97.3 is being brought to you by our friends over at the FanDuel Sportsbook inside the Bally's Hotel and Casino in Atlantic City, the sponsors of our featured Bet of the Week. We are 10-5 on the year with the featured Bet of the Week, thanks to Georgia State and Ball State hitting the over on Christmas Day. So you would have gone over to the FanDuel Sportsbook at Bally's Hotel and Casino in Atlantic City for the holidays, you would have cashed out. Of course, the retail sportsbook features 5 betting windows, a large video wall, a sports ticker, 20 self-service betting kiosks, and various lounge seats. Get your game face on and score big every time you over at FanDuel Sportsbook, over at Bally's Hotel and Casino, off the boardwalk in Atlantic City. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. We will hear now from Nick Sirianni, then we'll get back to your guys' thoughts and comments on the text board, 609-403-0973. Of course, you can DM the show through the 97.3 ESPN mobile app. Thanks to First Bank of Seattle City. We are live on YouTube at 973 ESPN. But right now, let's hear from the Eagles head coach with the latest, Nick Sirianni.
Hey, Coach. Appreciate you taking the time today.
Thanks.
Sorry you're stuck with me as your moderator again. We'll get started here with Mike Kay and then Ed Kraft.
Hey, Nick. Can you provide updates on Miles Sanders, Jordan Howard, Nate Herbig, Kayvon Wallace, and Brandon Brooks?
Sure.
I know it's a lot.
Yeah, I'll go through them one at a time. So Nate, I'm looking down at my sheet. He had a knee sprain. He could have returned if we needed him to. Jordan Howard, we MRI came back good, and again, we're hopeful. I'm not going to put any timetables on anybody, but we're hopeful for Jordan. Miles did break his hand, and obviously he'll be out this week, and then we'll reevaluate after a week. We're hopeful we can get him back at some point this season. So he will not be going to IR. Kayvon Wallace had a hip pointer. He should be fine. And the last one with Brooks. Yeah, no new update.
I had Ed and then Dave.
Hi, Nick. Jalen Hurts only had 2 carries yesterday. I wonder if that was just the game plan. Was it just kind of protecting his ankle? And then what does it say about his development as a passer that he's able to win a game like he did with just 2 runs?
Yeah, and that was actually similar to the game last week, right? With how he played, having 2 quarterback ratings over 100 and not doing it a lot with his legs. So I think it says a lot about his development and what he's done. But no surprise there. Jalen works like crazy to get better, and he's just getting better each week. And so and you always you're going to have some down games here and there. I know, he'll always want that first Giants game back, but these last 2 games have been really good for him. As far as our plan, yeah, a little bit is what the defense was giving us, and a little bit was, just being extra careful with his ankle. But I think we're past that point. I think we're able to do anything he needs to do for us to win the football game. So that means just playing how we need to play to win. And so I don't see there being any restrictions moving forward.
Go ahead, Dave, and then John McMullen.
Hey, Nick, with the NFL hiring cycle about to get started here again, it seems like Jonathan Gannon's name is already starting to come up. So first off, how do you think he would be as a head coach? And secondly, have you given much thought to how you want to handle these situations as a head coach, as some of your staff might get interest elsewhere?
Yeah, that's good. Thanks, Dave. That's a good question. I think Jonathan would be an awesome head coach. I really wanted to make a joke right there and be like, he'd be terrible because I really want him to keep. I want to keep him here, because I think so highly of him. But I think he'd be awesome. Again, for the same reasons I hired him to be our defensive coordinator. It'd be the same reasons I think he'd be a really good head coach. And so obviously, when people on your staff and people, in the building are getting up, get opportunities like that or get mentioned in that means you're doing some good things. And so, that's the plan. Like, that's what you always want as a coach, for your coaches to, get the opportunities because you've been doing well. And so, obviously that's flattering. What was your second question on that?
Just how do you handle those situations? Have you given thought to how you'll handle them as they arise? Whether
I guess
for head coaching jobs or just promotions elsewhere.
Yeah, I guess the way I would handle it is similar to I guess I go back to those situations I went through. I always wanted to make sure, obviously, that I got my work done before, for the team that I was currently working for before I did anything to get ready, for any head coaching opportunities. And so I was really only presented with that chance a couple times, or one time in particular, back in 2018. And there was a conflict between an interview and a game. And I just thought that, that game to our team was more important than anything else. And so I would anticipate, my suggestion to our coaches has always been, make sure you're ready before the season even starts for your head coaching opportunities. Again, because this is an experience that I was able to go through. That way, when you're in the season, your sole focus is on winning that football game and doing what we need to do to help the organization that we're in now. And so that's my message to these guys. And yeah.
Go ahead, John, and then Tim McManus.
Hey, Nick. Can you give me your thoughts on TJ Edwards from an offensive perspective? What he's added to your defense? It seems you guys really took off when he got placed in the middle there, and kind of wondering what your thoughts are and what he's added to your team.
Yeah, he plays with great physicality. He's constantly ripping at the football. Very smart player. And so that's the one thing that I really, the couple things that really stand out for me again as an offensive coach looking at the defense is, hey, you're going to get thumped when you go across the middle. You're going to get thumped when you come through the backfield, and you better protect that football. Again, I know the strip attempt, we're not getting a ton of fumbles out, but they're coming. They'll TJ is at the head of that because he is constantly ripping at that football. So those are the main things that stand out. And I just think he's playing really good football right now. And he's doing a great job leading the defense.
We'll go to Tim and then Bo.
Hey, Nick, two really quick COVID-related questions, if I can. Number one, with your return, did you test negative upon return, or did you do the new CT value of 35 or greater?
Yes, both.
Both. Okay.
Yeah.
And the second. Okay. So the second one is obviously there's a pretty good surge going on right now. Are you doing anything further with your protocols, and have you rethought separating the quarterbacks at this point?
Yeah. So we definitely did different things that weren't mandated a couple weeks ago, and we're going to continue with that. We are talking through it even more so as a staff today. I talked to a couple other head coaches and tried to figure out what they're doing, because we all know we're going to need to win this game this week. We're going to need all hands on deck. And so what is the best course of action? And obviously I'm talking to our doctors and our trainers to figure out the best course of attack. And we're going to make some adjustments. I'm not there 100% yet because I don't have to be quite yet, Tim, with the players not being back yet. But we're going to definitely make even more adjustments than what we need to, just to keep everybody safe. And the quarterbacks, yes, the quarterbacks will be in separate rooms. And we're going to be even more safe with them being in separate rooms.
Go ahead, Bo, and then Jeff.
Hey, Nick, having watched the film, what were the plays that you and Jalen might want to have back in that first half? And then also very, very quickly, is there a Debian Taylor update just to add him to the list of injured guys?
Debian Taylor, no, I got no new update on him. But with Jalen and myself, there was a couple of throws that I thought, I'm like, man, he missed that one. And I think to the naked eye, you could be like, man, he missed that one. But, there was a stop route on the boundary to Jalen Reagor, and he kind of skipped it to him. Well, when you look at it, the guy gets close to hitting his arm and he tips the ball. So that's where that died. And then, there's a missed throw that to me in the game looked like he missed it on a flat route to Miles. If you guys know which one I'm talking about, it was early in the game. We were backed up. It was first quarter. It looked like he missed it to Miles. And on second look at it, Miles' angle was at 8 yards, and Jalen's throwing it to a spot at 5 yards because that's exactly where Jalen's expecting him to be. And so those were the two, like, in the game. I'm like, gosh, let's go. Let's hit that right there. We need that. And neither of them were his fault. So really my point of saying all that is the only two I really want back, because I thought he was great with his decisions and was doing things that, that he needed to do to help us win the game. But the only two I want back is the ball security that came out that Dallas Goedert was right there to recover. And then the one where he threw an interception that got overturned. So it was just those two of being careless with the football that I want back for him. Otherwise, again, things that may have looked like that were Jalen's fault were not Jalen's fault. And I think that's important that you're not obviously outside world, you're not always going to know that. You're not always going to know the other way either, right? When it was Jalen's fault, when it didn't look like it was Jalen's fault. But so really looking at that, those are the two, the ball security things are what we want back. And I'm going to talk to him even a little bit more later today.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Jeff, and then Zach.
Nick, is Brandon Brooks' absence related to injury or something else?
Yeah, Jeff, no new update right there. Still working through that pec strain.
Does he have a chance to be back this season?
Again, no timetable. We're playing each week by week, and trying to figure it out.
Zach and then Martin.
Hey, Nick, whether it's coincidence or not, you guys and the Colts have had similar kind of in-season turnarounds here, and you were a part of this in Indy in past years as well. Is there anything to that, and how do you get it so your team is playing its best ball in December and January?
Yeah, I think there's a lot to that in the sense that, what Frank was so good at preaching was, how do we get – I know you guys have heard me say this a million times – how do you get a little bit better each day? And it is that is our intensity at practice. It is our detail and walkthrough and our full speed to the snap and walkthrough, and our detail in meeting, starting with the coaches and then to the players. And if you can be in this trajectory, or if you will, let your roots grow, your flower roots grow, right? All right, okay. All right, but if you can be in that trajectory where you're doing this a little bit more each day, and you can truly live by that, and just know that I'm not thinking about, right? I'm not thinking when the outside world might be thinking about playoffs. I'm thinking about how I'm going to get better today, to get better tomorrow, to get better the next day, to get the next day, so we can go 1-0 this week. And it's just staying in the moment and going little bit at a time. And when you're in this trajectory, I don't think every team thinks that way. And I know it. I know it doesn't. I've been on different teams. And so if you can get a little bit better and people level out at the end of the year, you're going to pass teams up. And so that's, I saw it work firsthand with Frank leading it that way. And again, I always thought that was an unbelievable message, regardless of the situation you're in, right? Whether you start 2-5, whether we were in Indy, we started 1-5. I believe Indy this year may have been 1-4. I can't remember exactly, but you just stay the course and you chip away at it. You can't score if you're down 17 points, or you can't score a 17-point touchdown, or in Frank's case, right? I get the best guy to ever learn from there. If you're down 30, this 30 for 30 was just on. If you're down 31-3 in the second half of the AFC divisional round against Houston Oilers, you can't score it all in one shot. So it's just staying in the moment and going a little bit each time. And I learned that a lot from Frank, and I know our guys believe in that, and I know our coaches believe in that, and we just talk about it every day. What are we going to do to get a little bit better today to put us in a position to go 1-0 this week?
We have time for two more, so go ahead, Martin, and then Rob Motti.
Hey, Nick. I want to ask you about Boston Scott. I mean, here's a guy, obviously didn't play at all for 6 games, on offense. And it seems like every time you need him to come in, he does the job for you. And obviously with Miles going to be out this Sunday and, Jordan's situation up in the air, I mean, how important does a guy like Boston Scott become to have on the team? And also like the running game in general, like how important do you see that, especially like in December and January, playoff stuff is on the line? Thanks.
Yeah, for sure. Just Boston is a guy that, has kind of just every time he's called upon, exactly what you're saying has came through. And we have no doubt that he'll be able to do the same thing this week when called upon. And he did it yesterday. And so it's great to be able to have that type of depth, and I think when you really look at it, we got a good group of backs. We got 4 backs that I think a lot of teams would like to have. So, I think there's a lot of teams out there that are looking and being like, man, how do we get Boston Scott on our team? How do we get this type of group of backs that if there's an injury, we seamlessly don't miss a beat when the next guy comes in. And so great credit to Howie and his staff of building that depth. And then just great credit to Boston, knowing that he can make those plays and just being there and stepping in when he's called upon. And I'm sure, I know Boston wants even more opportunities and he deserves more opportunities. We're just a really deep group at back. But when his number is called, which it will be more and more this week, I got no doubt that he's going to come through. And then as far as running the ball, sorry, I didn't answer your other question. As far as being able to run the football, particularly in December, especially out here in the Northeast, you got to be able to, right? Because you just never, what a beautiful day we had yesterday, right? On December 26th, to be able to have the sun shining like it was and everything, the temperature like it was. But we know that's I grew up in the Northeast over there in Jamestown, New York. I know that's a rarity at this time of the year. And so, less bad things can happen when you hand the ball off. And so we definitely need, especially when the weather is not the way you want it to be. So we definitely rely on that run game, particularly this time of the year.
Go ahead, Rob.
Hey, Nick, the end result yesterday for Jalen was a passer rating over 100 and a pretty good game all around. How much more do you learn about him, though, that he had to overcome that first half to get there, as opposed to if it was consistent start to finish? Do you get more out of, or do you learn more about his resiliency that way?
Yeah, I don't ever want to test it though. You're probably, hey, with the starting slow or anything like that. But again, yeah, he is a resilient guy. He's able to fight through and stay in the moment, and I think that's what you want out of all your players. I know that's what you want out of all your players. To be able to put those, I kind of explained it earlier too, like, to be able to put the ball, it was all about the ball and not, having those things that happened early on in the game with the football where they were a little careless with football, and then put that out and being able to move on. And he did the same thing in the Washington game. Again, we can't have that situation, but he's rebounded nicely. And then that goes back to his last game before these 2 games, these 200 quarterback ratings plus. These last 2 games was his worst game, right? We all know that. The game he played against the Giants was his worst game of the year, and see how he's rebounded from that, right? And so it speaks so much. The guy's got great character. The guy's got great football character. You just what you want out of your quarterback and one of your leaders. And so, again, I didn't think the first half was as bad as I initially thought, and I really wasn't all bad. It was more about the first quarter. I thought it was a little bit more than I thought. And then when you watch the tape, it was as an offense, but when you watch the tape for the quarterback, it wasn't as bad as I thought. It was just those 2 things that we talked about with the ball. But great resiliency from our quarterback, and that's what you need, because the rest of the guys will follow.
All right, thanks for the time, Coach.
All right, that was Nick Sirianni's day after press conference. We play it each day after right here on 97.3 ESPN. I was going to say every Monday, but again, like I told Scott Grayson earlier, I mean, Eagles will play it on Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Thursday this year. So, I mean, the Eagles can show up anytime, but a bunch of interesting things to take away from Nick Sirianni. We'll get to those takeaways on the other side. Don't forget, coming up, still football at 4, Jeff Moshe from the Inside the Birds podcast, Paul Hudrick on the Sixers' latest news from Liberty Ballers. One thought on every game. Casey Jordan will recap the entire NFL weekend. We got CBS Sports Jeff Kerr still to come as well right here on the Sports Bash. Josh Hennig filling in for Mike Gill live in the Matt Black Kia studios right here on 97.3 ESPN.
Now, back to the Sports Bash on 97.3 ESPN.
Josh Hennig back here in the Matt Black Kia studios here on 97.3 ESPN. We heard from Nick Sirianni. We'll get deeper into the Eagles coming up with Jeff Mosher from the Inside the Birds podcast. Before we finish this second hour of the show, I hear from some of you guys out there. A lot of messages get to want to thin out the herd a little bit. Over on the text board at 609-403-0973, texter says, hey, Josh, play call early in the game was terrible. I was like, just run the ball. Yeah, I think that Sirianni slightly addressed that in his press conference. It seemed like the Eagles were maybe overthinking a little bit. Sirianni does this. Sirianni sometimes overthinks the room and turns into the guy who's trying to outsmart. They think we're going to run. Now we're going to pass. And honestly, some of those passes may have worked if Goddard and Sanders and Rager don't drop the ball. So it's definitely something to keep in mind. A little bit earlier in the show, Christopher chimes in, I'm definitely not a Hurts supporter, but it's hard to discredit a person who leads a team the way he does. But he is getting better every week, which is a huge growth of the team. Great win yesterday. To me, Christopher, that's the biggest thing with Hurts. I think part of the problem is that people have not valued enough Hurts' value as a leader in this organization. Jalen is a guy the players look to. They voted him a team captain for a reason. The players voted him a Pro Bowl alternate for a reason around the NFL. He's a leader and people follow him. And I think that as long as he keeps growing and developing as a quarterback, he will be the starting quarterback for years to come in Philadelphia. But it's all on him. It's on him to keep developing. It's on him to keep growing. And I think, as you mentioned, he has done a great job at getting better, leading this team. And I think that the Eagles would love to have some of those drop balls back because it certainly makes his completion percentage look a lot better. That's for sure. I mean, look at the Washington game. He goes 20 for 26 and 2 of them are drops. So to me, I think Hurts has played better than maybe the on the surface numbers may tell us. And yes, yesterday was an important win for the Eagles. 8-7 on the year. Well, that's more to it about Jeff Mosher from Inside the Birds podcast next on 97.3 ESPN.
97.3 ESPN presents the Sports Bash with Mike Gill. It's time for Football at 4 with Jeff Mosier.
I think our track record in the last 20 years, how many NFC East titles, playoff appearances, and appearances in the NFC Championship game, those are some of the metrics I look at, and I'll compare our record with almost anybody.
Powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Now, live from inside the Matt Black Kia Studios. This is Football at 4.
Josh Hennig filling in for Mike Gill here on the Sports Bash on 97.3 ESPN. Yes, Football at 4 being brought to you by Caesars Entertainment Group of Atlantic City. Come experience the ultimate sports destinations all season long at the Wild Wild West, Tropicana, and Harrah's Resort, Atlantic City. Book your game day experience today at Caesars.com. And every Monday, Jeff Mosher joins the show here on 97.3 ESPN as the Eagles win. Of course, the latest Inside the Birds podcast dropped this morning, and Jeff joins us on the YouTube stream. Jeff, how you doing today?
I'm great, Josh. Merry Christmas. Happy holidays. Hope you're doing well.
Merry Christmas. Hope you had a good weekend with the family.
I did.
I see the dogs at least happy in the background.
You can hear that? Sorry, I can't control that one.
It adds flavor. It adds color to
Sure.
the thing. So, yeah, it adds ambiance. You know, hey, Jeff's actually just a working man. You know.
Yeah, he's like yay big for people who could see. My arm, my hands are like what, like a foot and a half apart, but he sounds like he's like a gigantic Doberman.
Oh,
little dogs have Napoleon complexes.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, Jeff, I want to start with the Eagles win. First of all, they won the game they're supposed to, right? They've covered the spread 3 straight games. So they're beating teams they're supposed to beat.
Right.
But the start of the game versus the end of the game, it's almost like 2 different teams. This is multiple times now that the first quarter, they look like one team, and then in quarters 2, 3, and 4, they look like something totally different. And I feel like that we got to get rid of the excuses now. Enough of they had a 16-day layoff. They had a 4-day turnaround. At some point, maybe this is just a slow starting team. They need to fix that.
Well, I mean, I think the reality is I don't know that there's quote slow starting teams, although maybe there have been in the course of the league. That's their identity. But I think the reality is they're not a great team. They're an inconsistent team. They're a team still trying to find an identity. I mean, we know they're a run dominant team and run the ball well, but even offensively, they're strange in that most teams that run the ball as much as they do, like a New England or a Cleveland, tend to have a kind of a dink and dunk style offense. But the Eagles are not dink and dunk. They're almost run, shot play, run, shot play. They get the 41-yarder to Quez Watkins, and they've gotten a lot of downfield plays from Devontae Smith and Dallas Goedert. They really don't hit that short to intermediate area game because that's really not the strength right now of Jalen Hurts and the offense in general. They drop passes. The quarterback doesn't always see the openings everywhere. So they're very strange offensively. And I think because of that, Josh, that's why they have those kind of throws of starting slow or not being consistent. They punted on their first 4 possessions yesterday. And then, of course, why is it that they pick up and seemingly blossom later in the game? I think some of that is when you're playing bad teams like the Giants are, you're eventually going to get them. And I thought the Giants defense was excellent in the first half and just got tired. I mean, they were on the field so much. Eventually you're going to hit those 2 or 3 big plays that sink them. And that's exactly what happened.
Do you think also there might have been a point where maybe the Eagles maybe didn't expect the Giants to play them so well on certain play calls? Like it seemed like Sirianni was suggesting at his presser today that they expected the Giants to be more prepared for the run than the pass at times. So is there a possibility that maybe the Eagles, part of their adjustment was also understanding what the Giants were doing a little better?
A little bit. I think the Giants did a lot of what they did the first time around, which was successful for them. What they did was they would play their, when the Eagles were in 3 wide, which is what they're mostly in, the Giants would respond to nickel, a 4-2 front, but they would bring a safety in late for that 7th person, and then they would blitz a slot defender from either the blind or the play side. So they were really showing 6, but bringing 8. And they were doing that a lot, Josh, on 1st and 2nd down, because their point was, all right, if you're passing, we're rushing your quarterback from the edge with the slot defender, and we're making him stay in the pocket. It's harder to get outside the pocket when you start bringing that edge pressure, right? Or if you're running, now we've got 8 people to try and stop you. You saw the Eagles pick up on that, and Jalen Hurts picked up on that after the first 2 series because they kept batting his passes. You know, he was trying to they definitely had routes built in for that kind of defense, the short, quick stuff to combat the blitz. But the Giants did a good job of batting a lot of those passes down at the line of scrimmage. So it was almost like a cat and mouse game. It was a game of an adjustment to an adjustment to an adjustment. And I thought the Giants did a pretty good job. You know, Jalen Hurts only ran twice. And you saw in the first half, he fumbled. He was inconsistent, almost threw an interception on that play to Dallas Goedert. But in the second half, the Eagles kind of got their shot plays going. They got the interception, which gave them a short field. They had the long pass to Quez Watkins, which gave them a really nice, field positioning there. And then, of course, the Jalen Reagor punt return gave them a short field. Jeff, they didn't have a long drive that we've seen typical of them until the fourth quarter when they went on the 10 play, I think 60-yard drive that ended in Lane Johnson's touchdown.
Jeff Mosher from the Inside the Birds podcast joining us here, Football at 4. Of course, InsideTheBirds.com for all their Eagles coverage, as well. The latest edition of the podcast dropped this morning. Jeff, one of the things you guys brought up on the pod I want to discuss a little further with you is there's still got the drops. The penalties are back. And, I think part of it is, they don't have as much talent as maybe some other teams do. But at the same time, Jeff, at some point, it's like you're being paid a lot of money to catch the football. Like, you need to catch the ball, man. Like, I don't understand how it seems like we've had a million wide receiver coaches come through this organization, and now this is their third head coach in the last several years, and you still have dudes dropping the ball.
Yeah, that's fair. And I would say outside of Reagor, who dropped the pass, it really wasn't the receivers, right? Because Goddard dropped 2 or 3. Miles Sanders dropped 1 in the flat. Jordan Howard dropped 1 in the flat. And then there was the Reagor. The Reagor. So there were about 5 or 6 there that were really, really costly. Goddard in particular, he had a great game a week ago against Washington as far as, yards and everything like that. And he did fantastically. But he dropped 2 screen passes that were so easy, Josh, and you saw so much green in front of him. I mean, the guy almost could have had 200 receiving yards if both of those screens are caught, maybe even if one was caught. You go back to the first loss against the Giants, Jalen Reagor definitely had those 2 drops at the end of the game, but sandwiched in between that was a drop by Goddard on the right sideline that would have put them in better field position for that final play instead of the heave to Jalen Reagor. So this is an area. And Jason Avant actually said this on our pregame show, and it was a really prescient point. If you want to put Dallas Goedert in that echelon with Kittle and Waller and Kelsey, he's got to do 2 things better. 1, he's got to catch the ball more consistently. Those guys almost never drop the ball. And 2, he's got to show that he can beat man coverage better, which is a different part of the question that you're asking. But that play early in the game sticks out where Jalen Hurts was flushed to the right, and he's trying to throw to Goddard. He almost gets picked off on the throw, but Goddard is getting plastered by Stephen. I can't remember his name at the last second. I couldn't remember his name on the podcast either.
Stephen Parker.
Yeah, Parker. Thank you. Right. You saw Parker do a pretty good job in the plastering there, and Dallas could not get off that coverage and get himself open.
You mentioned what Avant said on the pregame show with you guys on Inside the Birds pregame show. Is this could this maybe come back to bite the Eagles, that if Goddard doesn't develop the way you maybe hoped, that you might have to maybe the next time a contract rolls around, maybe you don't give him that extension again?
No, I mean, I still think, Josh, that he's one of the better tight ends in the league and has an opportunity to be among the best. Now, you're asking because they give him a contract extension that pays him like he's the best, but you know how the contracts work. The closer you get to free agency, the less of a discount and team-friendly deal you're going to be able to get. And they didn't want to go into next year without him being, unsigned. And, of course, the next few tight ends that wind up signing for big deals will push Goddard's number and everybody else is lower. And that's how it goes. I think, he deserved the contract. And I do believe, no matter what, that this passing offense has to go through Dallas Goedert first. I think he's the number 1 chain mover as of right now, with Devontae Smith either being 1A or 2. but he just himself has to recognize that responsibility and keep working on his craft and get better. Dallas Goedert.
Speaking of their craft, I thought that yesterday was a very, very positive day for Smith and Watkins at the receiver positions. And, something you guys talked about in the pod, we've talked about here on 97.3 ESPN. This team is going to need more talent next offseason to add to the roster, add to the receivers. You've mentioned multiple times them adding a veteran receiver. But I think that at least we know two of the receivers right now, Watkins and Smith, they should be here next year, and they're going to be a part of this team for years to come.
Yep, I agree. Would it surprise me if Jalen Reagor was not given another chance to come back? A little bit. We'll see what happens in the offseason. But I tend to think he's going to get a shot to come back. But I still wouldn't, if I'm the Eagles, and Adam and I have said this on the pod a couple of times, going back to August, we felt that they were going to be impacted by the lack of a veteran receiver. You've got so many young receivers. Now, Devontae Smith's a bulldog. He's a hard worker. He's no nonsense. Doesn't mean he can't use a good veteran to help him along the way. But you worry less about him. But it's such a young wide receiver group, and they've had guys where coachability has been a concern, and that's what landed Travis Fulgham off the team despite his great 4-game stretch last year, that it would have helped to have a veteran receiver who doesn't have to play every single snap. Maybe, just he's in there. He's good for the locker room. He plays half a game, whatever it is. That's the role right now for Greg Ward, and Greg Ward is sort of a veteran, being a third and fourth year player. But we were thinking more like an Emmanuel Sanders type or someone like that who could really kind of be productive, but also be a good model for the young wide receivers. And I think that's hurt them this year.
Although I would say that the fact that Greg Ward has 4 catches and 3 touchdowns this year is probably one of the strangest stat lines in Eagles history. Right. And 3 drop touchdowns. Right. It's like there's a part of you that's like, hey, put Greg Ward out there. Then he gets out there and you're like, and he dropped the ball. All right. Now we know he's on the bench.
Yeah, exactly.
Jeff Mosher from the Inside the Birds podcast joining us here on Football at 4 on 97.3 ESPN, at Jeff Mosher NFL on Twitter. Jeff, flipping over to the defense, listen, the Giants offense stinks. All right. I mean, let's not get too crazy. I mean, you played Jake Fromm this week and then Mike Lennon. Last week you had Garrett Gilbert. A couple of weeks ago, you had Zach Taylor and Trevor Siemian. So it's not like Jonathan Gannon's defense is playing elite or even above average quarterbacks. But what is a fair thing to take away from the defense over the last few weeks?
That is a great question because I've been wrestling with this for quite a bit. They really have taken a long stroll here down below average quarterback alley.
Yes.
So it's hard. I still can't say that I would trust, and clearly my dog doesn't trust either, Jonathan Gannon in a big spot, a playoff game against a good quarterback. I mean, the best quarterback they've beaten this year is Matt Ryan, who's a good quarterback, but not, this year they're a very average to below average team. So
right.
I think that there's a lot left to learn. The one thing you can take is that I think a guy like Milton Williams, rookie 3rd round pick, has definitely flashed. You've seen some penetration from him. You've seen that burst. So looking like right now, a decent pick, could play inside, could play outside, like that. And I do think that TJ Edwards has made a big difference on defense as far as how vulnerable they are against the run. All right. I mean, we go back to the first 7 weeks. It almost didn't matter who they were facing. I mean, the preseason told you that they were going to have issues. I know we don't like to make much of the preseason, but the Steelers and the Patriots in the preseason had more runs against the Eagles, and the Eagles had total plays. So I knew that was an indicator of something not right. And Atlanta ran all over them in the first half. And then we saw, as soon as they got Eric Wilson out of there and replaced him with TJ Edwards, they became tougher to run against. They're still not elite. There are still some games where like the Denver game, where the running backs had high yards per carry averages, but they were able to get ahead in that game. And so Denver couldn't rely on the run. Do I think they might be in the rude awakening in the playoffs when they face, or maybe even Dallas, who has a good running attack? Yeah, maybe you'll see that they're not as good against the run as maybe the stats suggest for the last 5 or 6 weeks, but they are so much better than they were the first 6 weeks. And that's a big plus for them.
And that leads me back into the other thing I wonder, which is how much of it is Gannon and how much it is the roster, because let's be realistic. It's not like the current roster is full of elite defensive players at every position group. So I'm not trying to hate on Gannon, but when I hear on Good Morning Football that he might be a candidate for a head coach opening, and the guy's been a coordinator for 1 year, there's a part of me that looks around. I'm just like, all right, well, what is Gannon at this point? He's a young coach. That's all I know.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about that, I don't put too much into that. It's not even a report, right? It was a discussion on the show because Gannon was considered a future head coach even before he got this job as a defensive coordinator. So that to me is a reputation type of analysis on his ability to become a head coach. I do think he is looked at around the league very favorably. And despite the bad start, I'm sure people will look and say, hey, they've allowed 18 or fewer points in their last 5 games, So that probably stands out a little bit. He's a good communicator. He's a really bright guy. That stuff tends to go over well in the hiring circles. And so I think that, that's why you're hearing his name, is because his name was already there as far as a future head coach. It's not necessarily for anything that he did that was so outstanding this year.
Yeah, and just to be fair, as you mentioned, Peter Schrager has brought up Gannon's name a gazillion times, I feel like, on NFL Network. So he's, for whatever reason, Schrager's been pounding the table or hitting the drum for Gannon for a while now, for whatever that's worth.
Mm-hmm.
But, Sirianni was asked about the idea that, he could have coaches plucked from his staff. And, it is a reality in the NFL. And now with the changes to the schedule, with when you actually can fire people, when you can talk to people, when you can interview people, that does add a twist and a curve to a season that's already a week longer in a COVID environment. It's just, it's another thing to throw out there.
It absolutely is. And I thought his message was the right one. Be prepared on your own time when it's good for you. He almost was saying, when you have that time to prepare, take advantage of it, because the time to prepare for a new, hiring search is not a week before the season's about to end when you're in a playoff push.
Jeff, speaking of that playoff push, the Eagles are now 8-7. They are in the driver's seat in that 7 spot, thanks to the Cowboys win last night. I think the Vikings loss on Sunday. So now the Eagles are 8-7. They double the win total from last year. Jeff, what is your perspective on this team at this point? Because new head coach in his first year, quarterback different from last year. There's a lot that's the same on the roster, but there's also a lot different from last year's team to this year's team.
Yeah. I mean, first, I didn't think the Eagles were going to be a 4-win or less team again. I felt that they had too much talent on the offensive and defensive line not to be better, as long as they just didn't have one of those kind of implosive years that they had where everything went wrong. And clearly they've been healthier than most NFL teams this year, which they couldn't say for the last 3 years. And they've had a little bit more, obviously more stability at the quarterback position this year than they did last year, and on the offensive line. So even with the injuries that they've had on the offensive line, they drafted well there, and they developed talent where they're to be able to handle it for this year. So that's a big part of it. They've won 8 games. I thought going into the year they were a 6 to 8 win team, so they have a chance to exceed my expectations here if they win any of these next 2 games. Do I think that they're a really good team? No. Do I think they're an okay team? Yeah, I think they're an okay team. And I think the big question you have to ask yourself is, how much does all of this mean now? Are they going to only make are they only going to add to this and make moderate changes in the offseason that are designed to improve what they've set, the foundation that they set this year? Or are they going to be a completely different looking identity next year based on their moves this offseason? That I still can't answer. And I think it's all to be determined.
If I could just play a little devil's advocate with you before I let you go, you mentioned they're an okay team, but Jeff, I could argue that half the league are okay teams. You know what I mean? It's not like, unless you have Aaron Rodgers, Tom Brady, or some elite quarterback, most of the teams in the league are kind of in that same range. And to me, the fact that the Eagles are in that same range, what you're basically saying is they're like half the league at this point.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I wasn't discrediting the Eagles. You're right. Most of the team is okay. Most of the league is okay. Then, we'll see in the playoffs. The okay teams are going to get weeded out pretty quickly, I think. So I think it's pretty clear right now who the elite teams are. You're looking at the Packers, fairly elite. I think you're looking at the Kansas City Chiefs, who've they've won 8 in a row again, 9 in a row. I mean, to me, that just like at the beginning of the year, I felt that they were the favorite to be in the Super Bowl. I know Tampa's had some injuries, but they got Tom Brady, so I don't bet against them. And we'll see after that. There's room. I think the Cowboys, nobody likes to admit it, but they're pretty good because even though their offense has been inconsistent this year, not last night, but this year, their defense has certainly improved as the year gone on, and they got healthier on defense, especially the defensive line as the year went on. And now you see what they've been able to do the last few weeks defensively. So they're a pretty tough team to beat as well.
He is Jeff Mosher at Jeff Mosher NFL on Twitter, InsideTheBirds.com for all of your Eagles coverage. And of course, the Inside the Birds podcast, latest edition dropped this morning. And then the film review, which will be Wednesday's pod, Q&A also later this week. So always keep it tuned to the Inside the Birds podcast. And we'll talk with Jeff again later this week. There actually is no show on Wednesday. So obviously this week is a little wacky this time of year with the bowl schedule. So we'll touch base with you, Jeff, and we'll figure out what the heck we're doing the rest of the week.
All right. Sounds good. Sounds great. If I don't talk to you, have a great new year. To you and
Jeff, take care of yourself.
Listeners. Take care.
Josh Hennig filling in for Mike Gill here on the Sports Bash on 97.3 ESPN. Of course, Football 4 being brought to you by Caesars Entertainment Group of Atlantic City. Come experience the ultimate sports destinations all season long at the Wild Wild West, Tropicana, and Harrah's Resort Atlantic City. Book your game day experience today at Caesars.com. All right. Well, I want to get back to your guys' thoughts and comments on the other side. I got a ton of messages I have not gotten to yet on the show. So we'll get to you guys coming up on the other side. And then we will dive deeper into the Sixers and Ben Simmons' latest news, and then more football talk with Casey Joyner at 5 p.m., Jeff Kerr from CBS Sports at 5:30. All that and more still to come right here on the Sports Bash. Josh Hennig filling in for Mike Gill live at the Matt Black Kia Studios on 97.3 ESPN.
Hurts takes the snap. He's back. He's looking, still looking. He is going deep. He wants Devontae Smith, who leaps, has it at the 20, comes to the 15, down to the 13. Devontae Smith showing why he won the Heisman.
Eagles 8-7, thanks in part to Devonta Smith and the efforts of two Alabama boys, Jalen Hurts and Devonta Smith. Josh Hennig filling in for Mike Gill here on the Sports Bash on 97.3 ESPN, the 4 o'clock hour, being brought to you by Prop Swap, America's sports betting marketplace. Sell your sports bet, take your profit. Find out how at PropSwap.com or by downloading the Prop Swap app today. We got a bunch of messages that have come in throughout the show, so I want to get to as many of them as possible. I know it's been a busy day. We got a lot of stuff to get to, but now that we have a little bit of an open segment here, I want to get to your guys' thoughts and comments that have been coming in throughout the show. Of course, a lot of you have been messaging in at 973 ESPN on the YouTube stream. Also, text board 609-403-0973. And, of course, you can DM the show through the 973 ESPN mobile app, thanks to First Bank of Sea Isle City. All right, let me just scroll up the feed here a little bit because we got a couple earlier. Joe Jackson has a bit of an issue with a pass in the game yesterday. He says the ball to Watkins was not a good pass. Watkins saved the play. Hurts actually threw a pick on that play except for Watkins. Well, here's the thing, Joseph Jackson, and I appreciate you chiming in. I don't know if that would have been a pick because the corner was technically behind Watkins. So to me, that was not a guaranteed pick. Like the Darius Slay drop of the pick should have been an interception. All right. He was in front of the receiver. He actually ran the route better than the receiver did, and he dropped the ball. The ball to Watkins and the ball to Smith, even though they were technically contested catches, they were both balls. The receiver was in a better position to get the ball than the corner was to get the ball when you go back and watch the tape and do the full 360 on the play. So I think that part of the problem, and it gets back to something that Renal says here, the Jalen slander in the media is not right. The problem with the Jalen Hurts hate is that there's a lot of people who, no matter what Jalen Hurts does, until he wins the Super Bowl, he's never going to be good enough for this city because Hurts wasn't a first-round pick. Hurts wasn't a guy that a lot of people loved. Hurts doesn't fit the profile or what they want from a quarterback. You know, he's not a pure pocket pass or whatever it is. It's like the whole thing with any quarterback that is anywhere outside the mold. The reality is that nobody's Tom Brady. Nobody's Aaron Rodgers. Nobody's Patrick Mahomes. And the problem is that when Jalen Hurts isn't at that level, to some people, he stinks. And what happens is that there's people in the media because they know that they have a gullible audience who doesn't think for themselves. They appeal to the lowest common denominator in that audience. They give a hot take. They give a slander perspective. They give a biased view of a situation. They don't tell you the whole story. They don't want to listen to actual objectivity and rational thought. All they want to do is vomit on television and the radio because they have an audience of a group of people who will eat it up because the audience, that's all they know. So the reason why the people in the media and the people out there on social media are so willing to slander Jalen Hurts is because at the end of the day, they're either just appealing to the lowest common denominator for clicks and views, or they're Neanderthals. At the end of the day, the quarterback position is the most important position in the NFL, but it's also the most overrated position in sports. Because at the end of the day, guess what? It doesn't matter how good your quarterback is. If the team around him isn't good as well, they're never going to win anything. Dan Marino never won a Super Bowl. Warren Moon never won a Super Bowl. But yet every single Eagle fan would love to have that guy in their prime on this team. But they never won a Super Bowl. Meanwhile, Trent Dilfer, Brad Johnson, Jeff Hostetler, Mark Rippon, they all won Super Bowls. It doesn't make them better quarterbacks. But the problem is that people hold these people to ridiculous standards. Now, a comment like this, I can honestly work with more, okay? Comment here, the message in says, Hurts' deep passes lack serious philosophy. Smith and Watkins saved interceptions, 15 to 20 yards. He's fine. He's a little more work on the placement and accuracy. First of all, again, we got to stop with they saved interceptions, all right? It's a wide receiver's job to go get the ball, all right? Go watch an entire Brady game with the Bucs or the Patriots. Not every pass is 100% accurate. Aaron Rodgers, Brett Favre, Dan Marino, Joe Montana. Name the quarterback. Not every pass is 100% accurate. And like I said, in both situations, the corner was behind the receiver, so it would have been harder to get an interception anyway. In fact, I would argue the cornerbacks, if they were better, should have knocked the ball down, but instead, they were outplayed by better players, that being Watkins and Smith. But back to Hurts and the velocity. Yes, he doesn't have a howitzer for an arm. He doesn't have a bazooka. He doesn't have this elite arm talent. But what Hurts does have is he actually has a stronger arm than Gardner Minshew does. He has a good throwing arm, but not a great throwing arm. Part of the problem is people watch Patrick Mahomes, Aaron Rodgers, even Justin Herbert, for example, with the Chargers, and say that guy's got a bazooka for an arm. They have serious velocity. Well, the problem is the majority of quarterbacks in the NFL don't have that type of velocity. Even Russell Wilson, some of his balls look like they hang a little bit in the air when he throws the deep ball. You could be a deep ball thrower and anticipate or have ball placement. I don't think it's fair to just say that, guys like, for example, as Renal brings up, Lamar Jackson has some deep ball passing problems. Maybe they should use him more as a dual threat. The problem with the guys in the dual threat quarterback and the deep ball is because if you go back and watch them, a lot of them don't have the mechanics in place. The problem with a guy like Steve Young was before Bill Walsh got a hold of him, he was playing on pure talent. He wasn't playing at a level that would make him an efficient quarterback. It wasn't until a guy like a Steve Young or Michael Vick when Andy Reid got a hold of him, or a guy, just use an example like Donovan McNabb when he got to the NFL. A lot of these guys don't have the footwork in place. They do not have the mechanics down. That's a big problem when it comes to deep passing and accuracy. Look at Patrick Mahomes. He was a different quarterback when he starting with the Chiefs than he was in college. In college, his footwork was garbage. His mechanics was trash. He was playing on pure talent alone. But as soon as Andy Reid got a hold of him and he listened to Alex Smith, they helped refine his mechanics. And I think Lamar Jackson and Jalen Hurts have both made strides in terms of becoming better quarterbacks. Now, I'm not saying that they're great passers, but I'm saying that the growth of Hurts from being a dual threat recruit coming out of high school to a quarterback now who actually can make throws that you need to win games should be applauded. And I think that Hurts' leadership combined with his development are good things. But just because he doesn't have a howitzer for an arm and just because he's not one of the 5 best quarterbacks in the league doesn't mean you can't win with him. It just means you don't have one of the 5 best quarterbacks in the league. Josh Hennig here, filling in for Mike Gill on the Sports Bash on 97.3 ESPN. Good comments coming in there on the YouTube stream as well as on the text board at 609-403-0973. We're going to get back to the Eagles in about 23 minutes from now, but right now we're going to take a break and we're going to hear from Paul Hudrick from Liberty Ballers. The Ben Simmons saga takes a new turn. What do we make of the latest reports and rumors? We'll ask Paul Hudrick next, right here on 97.3 ESPN FM, the 97.3 ESPN mobile app. We are live on YouTube at 973 ESPN. I'm Josh Hennig, filling in for Mike Gill on the Sports Bash.
Now, back to more Sports Bash with Mike Gill on 97.3 ESPN, South Jersey's sports leader.
Josh Hennig back here in the Matt Black Kia studios here on 97.3 ESPN. Filling in for Mike Gill. Yes, Matt Black Kia, they will get you approved today. That's Matt Black Kia on the Black Horse Pike in Egg Harbor Township. Visit them online at mattblackkia.com. But join us to get more into the latest with the 76ers, as it's certainly been, to say the least, an interesting year for the Philadelphia 76ers. Paul Hudrick joins us right now from Liberty Ballers right here on 97.3 ESPN, talking about the latest with the 76ers. Paul, how are you doing? How was your Christmas?
I'm doing great, Josh. And, Christmas was real low-key for us with the newborn and everything. We just had a very small a few visitors, and that's it. And we just kept it low-key, and we were good with it, but it was good overall.
Listen, there's nothing wrong with low-key, okay? Sometimes low-key is what you need in life, okay? Let's be realistic.
Very true.
Paul, I want to start with the Ben Simmons report from the weekend, because Woj, obviously, part of being on that Christmas Day thing is Woj being there, and Woj is going to say something about somebody at some point on a broadcast like that. So, to me, what Woj said wasn't earth-shattering, but I thought he made a very good point at the beginning of the report, which was that, listen, the reason why trades haven't really been talked about is because teams are more worried about having players in the court because of COVID. They are about making trades right now. And I thought that was a very important thing to remind people, no matter how frustrated about, why is it Ben Simmons trade? Because teams, their priorities are a little different right now. They're trying to make sure they have players on the floor to play these games so they have no more postponements.
Right, and you see the players that are getting signed and the guys that they're having to dig up, you know what I mean? Whether it's G League guys, whether it's a guy like Joe Johnson or Lance Stevenson who haven't played in the league in years, but we're still keeping themselves in shape and ready for an opportunity to come back. So, yeah, I think that your point is correct, that the NBA GMs are just a little bit preoccupied just filling out enough roster spots to get through games. And that's part of the league has required teams to do that. So if you don't have the necessary players, you have to go out and sign them. The Sixers obviously went out and signed Tyler Johnson, who's a guy who, again, wasn't hanging around the G League, but was keeping in shape, did play for the last 2 seasons for the Nets, didn't find a team this year, but he stayed in shape, and they're giving him opportunity. Actually, he's looked pretty good, to be perfectly honest with you. But, yeah, sure. I agree with that sentiment, that it's NBA GMs right now just have their hands full with this. So I know Woj had mentioned before, that talks were picking up before that December 15th date, and then when this happens. So I imagine once the dust settles from this, and once teams start getting back to normal, then they can conduct business as usual, and perhaps then we see some more traction.
Now, the other thing Woj said in the report that he had on Christmas Day television, for those who may not have seen it, is that he mentioned 4 teams. Now, it's not like Woj to name things without having a reason for naming it, right? So, he named Indiana, he named Minnesota, he named Sacramento, and he named Cleveland. What is Paul Hudrick's perspective on those 4 teams potentially engaging or re-engaging the Sixers in a Ben Simmons conversation?
Well, I 100% understand why all 4 of those teams, I think, would become better with Ben Simmons on their rosters. I think he'd make all 4. He would raise the floor on all 4 of those teams. So I certainly get it from all their perspectives. I will say from the Sixers perspective, none of those teams really have any major assets that I would want. I mean, I should rephrase that. Major assets that they would be willing to give up in order to get, because sure, if you offer me Anthony Edwards, I'd do that tomorrow, but that ain't happening. Or Darius Garland for that matter with Cleveland. But those 2 guys, I imagine their teams they're as close to untouchable as it gets. So what I think is, and I think Woj has mentioned this before, where this is going to be a scenario where it's going to be complicated, complex trade. It's not going to be the Sixers and one other team, and then that's it. It's going to be probably 3 or 4 teams, so that a team that really wants Ben Simmons can get him, and that another asset that the Sixers want, that all-star caliber player they're looking for, comes from elsewhere. Because of those teams, the only players that perhaps fit that description, Domantas Sabonis, not just flat out not a good fit here. I don't think that makes any sense to bring him into the fold, especially with Tobias, like already with Joel and Tobias at the 4. I think that would be a mistake. A guy like De'Aaron Fox, you could say last year was perhaps on an all-star level, has regressed a little bit this season. From the people I've talked to, I don't think the Sixers really have very much interest in De'Aaron Fox. I think he's kind of seen as a little bit repetitive with Tyrese Maxey, quite frankly. And then on top of that, Maxey has already shown more shooting growth than De'Aaron Fox. And I think you can make the argument that he's already a better defender than De'Aaron Fox. But still, that's not to take anything away from Fox, who I think is still a very dynamic player and a borderline all-star when he is right. So yeah, with all that said, I just think it's going to take another team or two to get involved to make sure that the Sixers get the players, the assets that they want. But those teams, like I said off the top, certainly I could see why they would all have interest in Ben Simmons.
A couple of things I want to pick at from what you said. Now, one, about the Tyrese Maxey thing. I agree 100%. To me, why would you acquire De'Aaron Fox if you already have Tyrese Maxey? At this point, I think Maxey has a higher ceiling, you could argue, than De'Aaron Fox at this point. Fox has been in the league for a few more years. And let's be realistic. Part of the problem with the conversation is that we know Daryl Morey wants something big in return, right? He's not going to just take, I've called it, he's not going to make the Andrew Lang trade. He's not going to trade Barkley for a bunch of dudes. I think the Sixers understand that they need to trade Ben Simmons, but I think they're also waiting on someone to get desperate. And you mentioned Anthony Edwards. If Minnesota is serious about building around Karl Anthony Towns, they got to put up or shut up at some point, right? So, for any of these teams, if you want Ben Simmons, I think Morey in some ways is saying, listen, man, I'm willing to give you Ben Simmons, but you got to give me something in return. And for a team like Minnesota, or you mentioned Darius Garland with Cleveland, they may have to make a tough decision. What's more important, getting Ben Simmons or staying the same?
Right. I think for those teams, they're more hopeful that something like Bradley Beal perhaps gets antsy in Washington, and you can get Washington in on the deal where you're shipping the Wizards, some draft picks, and the Bradley Beal's coming to the Sixers, and then you're not having to give up, because I think Edwards is a guy. I think when you look at Towns and you look at Edwards, I think those are the two guys, right, that they're building around. I literally think anybody else on that entire Minnesota roster is available other than those two. So I just and quite frankly, if you're looking at it from the Sixers perspective, as much as I love Anthony Edwards and I would take him here in a heartbeat, when you look at his age, that is the concern. If you're, I would do it. Don't get me wrong, but I think the better deal would be for someone like Brad Beal, who is a little bit more in line timeline wise with Joel Embiid and makes sense as a partner going forward for him. So I think if you're in Minnesota or if you're in Indiana or Cleveland again with Cleveland, Darius Garland is just such a perfect fit right now with what they have with Evan Mobley, who's a really impressive defensive rookie, with Jared Allen, who's really proving to be, a borderline all-star center right now. When you look at that roster and the way it's built, Garland is perfect for it. So I don't think that they have an appetite for that as well. Sexton's hurt. I don't even think I believe it's torn meniscus. So I don't imagine he will be back. And even then, I think you're running into the same argument with De'Aaron Fox. Like, right. Are we sure that basically Sexton isn't just Maxey with more opportunity? So is that that really doesn't make any sense for the Sixers either. So I think the goal of those teams that really want Ben is to really hope, to your point earlier, that, the Wizards really start to go into tank and Bradley Beal gets antsy, or, we've heard whispers of it. I don't see it happening, but, the Celtics just completely fall apart and then Jaylen Brown becomes available. All those teams, I think, are banking on something like that to happen that will help grease the wheels so that they're offering draft compensation in order to get Ben Simmons. Because it's such an unprecedented situation too, Josh, where you got a player demanding a trade from a good team that's trying to compete and not a bad team where he's trying to get to a contender. It's a very different situation in that regard. So draft picks just aren't going to cut it. So if you get a third team that perhaps would like those draft picks, that's how you get that done.
Paul Hennig from Liberty Ballers joining us here on the Sports Bash on 97.3 ESPN. Josh Hennig filling in for Mike Gill at Paul Hudrick on Twitter. Give him a follow there. Now, the Sixers, as currently constructed, are 17-16. Part of that record is because, like a lot of teams in the league, they've had COVID issues. They've had guys in and out of the lineup. So what is a fair assessment of the Sixers at this point in time? Because, Paul, I think a lot of people, they might see the record, but maybe they didn't see all the games.
Right. I would say that they are no worse than like the fourth or fifth best team. At least this is my opinion. When they're fully healthy, I think they are no worse than like the fourth team in the conference. I think clearly the Brooklyn Nets and the Milwaukee Bucks are ahead of everybody. They're the cream of the crop. They are the best two teams in the conference. I think Miami, when they have been healthy, because they've been in a similar boat where they have got plenty of guys shuffling in and out of the lineup. I think that they, with the addition of Kyle Lowry and some of their younger guys stepping up, I think it's pretty clear that they are in that conversation, perhaps like the third best team in the conference. After that, I think it gets murky. I mean, right now the Bulls have the second best record in the conference, but guess what? The Sixers have beaten them twice. And so I think that you can certainly make an argument that the Sixers are a better team than the Bulls. And the other teams like the Celtics, I think the Sixers are better than the Celtics. Name more and more teams, and I don't think you can come up with, like I said, I think fourth. I don't think you can come up with more than 3 teams that are better than the Sixers right now, especially with Joel Embiid. When he is healthy, you see what he's done over his last handful of games. He's been sensational. He is an MVP candidate. Tobias Harris, last couple games, he really struggled. There's no hiding behind that, but he's starting to get it together a little bit. Seth Curry is healthy and looking good. Maxey is he's still feeling things out, but he's really starting to get in the groove. They're getting guys back. They got Furkan Korkmaz finally getting going last night. George Niang back in the fold, who I thought looked pretty good. Look at Drummond back here in short order. Shake Milton. So Matisse Thybulle. I didn't even mention Matisse Thybulle and how great he's been defensively. And Danny Green, who I think is better than a lot of people give him credit for. He's in protocols right now, and he'll be back. So I just think as they get healthy, and and also in January, Josh, the schedule really softens up compared to December. In December, they played a lot of road games. They played a lot of tough teams. I know they lost to some shorthanded teams, but overall, their January schedule is much softer than December. So if there was ever a time for them to kind of get going and make a run, I think January is a time, and I think that is where you're going to get an even more fair assessment of where they are.
Paul, before I let you go, not a lot of time here, but I want to ask you about one guy we haven't discussed. To me, I don't think we talked enough about Doc Rivers this year. I think he's a coach of the year candidate. I think the job that he has done keeping this team basically focused and competitive, I don't think it's talked about enough. I understand a lot of teams deal with COVID issues, but I feel like when I watch certain other teams, they have COVID issues, it all falls apart. Like, for example, no offense to Steve Nash, I think that team is not Steve Nash. I think it's Kevin Durant's team. You know what I mean? Whereas I think Doc Rivers has taken this team and said, I know how to overcome things. Let me help you guys.
Yeah, you know what? I would have agreed with you maybe up until the last 2 weeks, because I would say this. I was really disappointed to see the way they came out against Miami, who was shorthanded, against Atlanta, who was shorthanded. Before that, Memphis, granted, they were shorthanded as well in Memphis, but just the way they followed up that Golden State game, that Golden State win on a Friday night, just with clunker after clunker after clunker, that was really disappointing to me. And to me, it was especially, again, that Miami game and the Atlanta game where they had more talent on the floor, clearly had more talent on the floor than those two teams. To see them kind of throw up duds, that was really disappointing. And that, quite frankly, speaks to me of a team that perhaps wasn't ready and perhaps took the other team a little bit lightly. Now, to counter that, last night, that was an excellent win for them. They really took care of business on the road against a shorthanded team. So I think that Doc Rivers as a motivator is a really, really good motivator. I think that's what he does. He's a good leader. Some of his decisions in lineup, some of his decisions strategy-wise, I think we could argue, perhaps push against. But I do agree with you that I think he has done a really good job of keeping the team together this year, considering the protocols, considering the injuries, the Ben Simmons situation. He has done well to make sure that everyone is in the right mind frame.
He is Paul Hutter. Check out all of his coverage of the Sixers at Liberty Ballers. Sixers back in action tomorrow night versus the Toronto Raptors. Coverage begins at 7:30 right here on 97.3 ESPN. Paul, always glad to talk with you. Appreciate the conversation. And if I don't see you before then, Happy New Year, my friend.
Same to you as well, sir. Happy New Year.
Josh Hennig here on the Sports Bash, filling in for Mike Gill on 97.3 ESPN. Of course, our Sixers conversation with Paul Hudrick being brought to you by Matt Black Kia. Matt Black Kia, they want to get you approved today. That's Matt Black Kia on the Black Horse Pike in Egg Harbor Township. Visit them online at mattblackkia.com. Coming up on the other side, one thought every game. Casey Joyner will join us right here on 97.3 ESPN. A full football hour coming up next. The football scientist Casey Joyner, followed by CBS Sports Jeff Kerr, all still to come right here on 97.3 ESPN. And we'll get to more of your thoughts and comments as well in the next hour. Keep them coming. Text board is open, 609-403-0973. DM the show through the 97.3 ESPN mobile app. It's free thanks to First Bank of Seattle City. And we are live on YouTube at 973 ESPN. I'm Josh Hennig at Josh Hennig on Twitter.
South Jersey's play-by-play home for the Eagles,
Touchdown!
Sixers, and Flyers.
He scored!
97.3 ESPN, WENJ, WENJ HD Millville, Atlantic City, a Town Square media station.
Josh Hennig filling for Mike Gill on a Monday edition of the Sports Bash here on 97.3 ESPN. Busy NFL weekend. A lot of teams put themselves in the driver's seat to make the postseason. A lot of teams, well, they dropped the ball. Eagles 8-7, So we got a lot to get to with Casey Joyner, whose Monday appearance on the Sports Bash is being brought to you by Cape Regional Health Systems. For a healthier life, call 609-463-CAPE. That's 609-463-CAPE for Cape Regional Health Systems. Yes, Casey Joyner, the football scientist. Check out all of his work on The Athletic as well as the Philadelphia Inquirer. Joins us right here on 97.3 ESPN. Casey, how you doing today?
Doing great. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good, and it definitely was a very interesting football weekend. Of course, as always, we do start with the Eagles. I want to ask you a big picture question first. We get the nitty-gritty details. When you look at the Eagles at this point in time, Casey, they're 8-7. They doubled their win total from last year. What do you accredit that to? Because there's a lot of reasons why this team went from what they were last year to this year, but is there anything that stands out more to you than others?
It's been the development of all three areas of their team. We know about their offense. Their offense had, going into this game, 175 more rushing yards in 7 straight games, most since the 85 Bears. So we know how good the offense has been. I wrote about in the Inquirer this past weekend, or this past Friday, about how good the Eagles' defense has been. We can get into that here in just a second, but the Eagles' defense has been superb over the last few weeks. Not just good, but superb. And the special teams didn't like the field goal missed in the first half. It was probably due to a bad snap. But the special teams has also been playing a lot better than they were. I think when you get 3 young coordinators, or head coach being coordinator, other 2 young coordinators, and give them time to develop with a talented team, I think that's why you get a lot of improvement.
So if I could play devil's advocate with you, because you mentioned the defense, my question is they've played Jake Fromm plus Mike Glennon, Garrett Gilbert, Trevor Siemian, and Zach Wilson on a very bad Jets team. So how much it is the opposition, how much is the defense just doing their job against bad offenses?
If you're a good team, if you're a solid defense, and in fact, remember I've got my color grading system where I've got green is really good for a team, yellow is okay, and red is bad. I found over the years that if you're, say, a yellow rated run defense, and you face a team that is a yellow-rated offense or a red-rated offense, they'll tend to play about where they were. What you really look for is when you can be, for another team, you could be a red-rated defense, let's say for the Eagles, which means you're going to get them to play worse than they might normally. In other words, if you're playing these terrible quarterbacks and you're playing these terrible teams, okay, you should be able to dominate them, but not everybody does. Zach Wilson's had some good games. We saw Houston have a good game yesterday against the Chargers. I mean, teams that are supposed to be bad can have good games, and they can go against that form. And if you make them play to their talent level, it says that you are that good because you're not letting them play any better than they are. So that's what I like seeing out of them is that, they're playing bad teams, but they're making them look bad, which is what you're supposed to be able to do.
How much of the defense's success has also been the fact that the defensive coordinator, Jonathan Gannon, has kind of unleashed Slay, that he's kind of let him be big play Slay, the guy that he says that he is. Slay's always said, I'm a big play guy. Don't call me Darius, call me big player, call me Slay, right? Well, it's hard to be that guy when the coach isn't letting you be that guy. So I feel like the last several weeks, he's let Slay be that guy.
Yeah, I think if you're Gannon, you come into the season, you don't want to run the scheme that Schwartz ran. It was successful, but it had its weaknesses, and you're trying to develop a larger game plan. You're trying to give yourself more tools down the stretch. So in case plan A doesn't work, you're going to have plan B built in. And I think early on, when the players are still learning the system, you don't want to let them go and be themselves or go be really aggressive because you're trying to keep players from getting out of position. It had its mistakes because we saw what happened against Kansas City. Yeah, they're playing cover 2 shells and still having people run behind them. But I'll give you a metric from that article that I said, because it's not just in coverage and such. The Eagles, going into last week's contest, since week 8, or going into the Giants contest, since week 8, the Eagles had allowed only 554 rushing yards, marked the second best in the league in that span behind Tennessee. Only giving up 3.7 yards per carry, 4th lowest in that time frame. And you talk about the bad quarterbacks. Look at the running backs they faced in that time frame. DeAndre Swift, Austin Eckler, Javonte Williams, Melvin Gordon, Saquon Barkley, Antonio Gibson, 4 of those backs coming into Sunday ranked in the top 14 in rushing yards, and the Eagles defense made them look ordinary, and they also led the NFL in yards before contact since week 8 per True Media. So they have been aggressive in their front 7, and I think that's also allowing their secondary to be as aggressive as it is.
The football scientist Casey Joyner joining us here on the Sports Bash on 97.3 ESPN. Of course, you can follow him on Twitter at KC Joyner TFS. Check out all of his coverage over at The Athletic as well as the Philadelphia Inquirer. Now, Casey, flipping back to the offense, we have seen multiple times now that this team, they start out very slow offensively. They have some trouble in the first quarter, but they look completely different the rest of the game. And I understand that part of that is 16-day layoff, 4-day turnaround. But I don't think we can undersell the fact that a part of the reason they have turned it around is the quarterback. So what is your take on Jalen Hurts at this point?
Now, I find the biggest answer, they did look rusty as can be. I dropped passes in the first half too, so a lot of that, some of that wasn't on him. But I'm looking at the numbers here for passes against the Giants, short passes that is run 10 or fewer yards downfield. Jalen Hurts, 13-22 for 78 yards, 3.6 yards per attempt. Now, he had a 96.4 passer rating because 2 of those passes went for touchdowns. But if you're getting 3.6 yards per short pass attempt, that's atrocious. 6 is good. 7 is great. You want to be at least above 5. So you be at 3.6 is awful. But then you flip it over and say, okay, how did they do on vertical passes? And they throw 11 or more yards downfield. 4-7, 121 yards, 17.3 yards per attempt. Okay, I like that. You can live with that rate of completion. So I think what it is that we saw him getting vertical. We saw him having success in that game, and they didn't have success in the short passing game. And again, some of it was due to drops. So the short passes are easier to correct than the vertical passes. If you're hitting vertical passes against, Franco's a pretty solid secondary. If you're hitting vertical passes against them, you can correct the shorter pass stuff. That's the easier fix.
As a general principle, when you talk about drops, how do you look at a quarterback when you see guys dropping the ball? Because we know that, that doesn't get counted. It's not like in baseball where it's like, hey, you get a walk. They don't count it against your batting average, right? A drop pass counts as an incompletion for a quarterback. So, is there something we need to factor in when we look at it, say the quarterback puts the ball on Dallas Goedert's hand, he just plainly drops it for 2 straight weeks?
Well, that's obviously on the receiver. What I found in looking at drops, I've done a number of studies for the fantasy football coverage I've done for my draft guide and for the Athletic, and found that when you look at drops, they don't tend to be something that, a player will walk every, you get Sandover walks every year in baseball. Well, in football, a lot of times you'll see drop rates vary dramatically. See, Deontay Johnson was good or solid in that 2 years ago, terrible in that last year, good in that this year. I mean, he was one of the worst drop guys in the league. He dropped the pass yesterday, but I mean, for the season, he's been pretty good. You'll find that receivers, generally speaking, that's not a metric that tends to have predictive value or strong enough predictive value, because frankly, there's such a low percentage of passes, generally speaking, are dropped. You'll find it more having an impact on a game-to-game basis rather than over the course of a season, because generally speaking, you just only see 3 to 5% of passes dropped. And and when you get a bunch in one game, a lot of times you won't get any in others. So I don't read too much into it as long as he's throwing accurate passes. But he did throw some inaccurate passes as well.
Now, with that being said, there's a split in the fan base right now, Casey. There's the fans out there who says, I love Hurts. I love his leadership. I love the fact that this guy will keep fighting. I love the fact that this guy, can make the deep ball that you mentioned. They like all these different things. Then you have the other side of the fan base that say, you can't win with Jalen Hurts. He's a mobile quarterback. He doesn't have the arm velocity needed to win the NFL. So it's very different groups of people with this guy. And it's not like with Carson Wentz, where it was like you knew Wentz had the talent. It was whether Wentz could execute or he would stay healthy. With Hurts, it seems like you have 2 fans. They see the same game and they see a completely different quarterback because they have different eye sets looking at it.
I wonder what we'll be saying about Jalen Hurts if he had, say, Joe Burrow's combination, where the Bengals, they got Burrow and they have Tyler Boyd, they have Jamar Chase, they have T. Higgins. Look what T. Higgins did yesterday. He crushed fantasy teams. He
crushed mine, that's for sure.
I had him against me in one, but I had Burrow in one league against him, so I got to they nullified each other. But when you have that kind of weaponry, that's what your offense could do. I mean, Baltimore was what it was. We'll talk about that in a second. But the idea that you have that much weapon around him, and I look at Jalen Hurts, and I go, okay, he's got Smith. Smith made a good catch yesterday. I mean, Watkins made that one good catch on that pass that looked like when he threw it across the field pass, looked like that thing's going to get picked, and Watkins saved him for it. That was good. We know Goddard's been a very good tight end, but is he a Zach Ertz? When is he at that level as a pass catcher? He might be, but he might not be. I mean, I still look at his receiving core and go, okay, this is a run-first quarterback. Went around, 2 times yesterday? Did not run much. So they wanted to put the ball in his hands more often in the air. And I think that was part of it, too. I think the Eagles probably went into this game and said, okay, the Giants are not a great team. They do stop the run better than they stop the pass. Maybe we need to get some diversity. But if we're going to diversify our offense, we need to get practice in it going into potentially a playoff berth this year. We've got to do that now. We've got to get something going. I think, again, that's what they did on defense early in the year. They said we got to diversify that. We know we've got the ground game. We've got to get some aerial passes or some aerial production going. Plus, I'd have to mention, with Sanders being hurt, the Eagles – early in the year, they did bad in a metric. I have a good blocking yards per attempt, measures how productive you are when you get quality run blocking. They were average and they weren't great. They were just so-so. But when Sanders finally got going, they got much better in that metric because he had some breakaway skills. I don't think they're the same breakaway skills when he's not in the lineup. So I think they are going to have to get more big plays out of their passing game because the running game is going to be consistent and productive, but it's not going to be able to probably give them the breakaway ability that it had when Sanders was fully healthy.
Yeah, Nick Sirianni said today that Miles Sanders has a broken bone in his hand. He's expected to miss the next game, but he won't go on the IR. So it's not a long-term issue. The good news is Jordan Howard, stinger, but the MRI came back good. He should be okay to go. So that's a positive going for that as well. And then, of course, you have Kenneth Gainwell out there, and we saw what the Eagles did with Scott and with Howard in the Detroit game. Not saying that you can do that every game, but at least you had that productivity. Although you're playing Washington coming up next, and we'll start with there, Casey, because last night you have Allen and Payne, 2 Alabama teammates, fighting with each other on the sideline, and the Cowboys completely blasted them. This is the 2 next teams you're going to face. You're going to see Washington next week again, and you're going to see Dallas in 2 weeks. So is there anything that Eagle fans can take away from the game last night that they should be looking forward to with those teams?
I'd be quite scared to play Washington coming off that performance because a team can either, when you get beat that bad, and when it's 42-7 at halftime, 49-7 at one point, and ended 56-14, when you get beat that bad, you can either turn on yourselves, or you can turn on your opponent. And I have a feeling that they might turn on their opponent because Ron Rivera has dealt with this kind of thing before. He played at the 85 Bears, one of the most volatile teams ever. So he's used to having that sort of volatility around him and knows how to deal with it. So if I was the Eagles, I'd be a bit concerned because they're going to be embarrassed by last week, and they're not the kind of team I think that's going to give up. So it's going to be a problem.
Are the Cowboys the team that we saw last night, or are they the team we saw a couple of weeks ago that lost to the Raiders at home on Thanksgiving?
They are, mentioning volatility, they are an incredibly volatile team. They have the ability for all the big plays on offense, but you can also look at some of their metrics in pass defense. They make the big play or they give up the big play, and they can stop the run really well, but you can also gash them. They're a team that, if I'm looking at going to the playoffs, they're not a team that you're going to want to face in the playoffs in the NFC, or if they make it to Super Bowl, you're not going to want to face them there. But they are so Jekyll and Hyde that if they either have to win 3 if they get the first seed, or if they got to win 4 if they don't win the first seed, that's when you're that volatile and you're that up and down. A lot of times you're not going to be able to put 3 or 4 games in a row together that are really strong. So if I was Dallas, I'd be worried about that. You got to get more consistent.
All right, let's go. One thought on every game. Casey Jordan, the football scientist, joining us here on the Sports Bash here on 97.3 ESPN. I'm Josh Hennig, filling for Mike Gill on a Monday edition of the show. Casey, our second game of our NFL triple-header yesterday on 97.3 ESPN FM. We saw Kansas City crush the Steelers, but I'm starting to wonder I know Kansas City's good, but are the Steelers just not good enough this year?
They just don't have quite enough talent. And they're a team that has talent in certain places, but I don't think they have the consistency of talent across the board. Their secondary is still way too weak. They can't run block well. They know, you look at certain teams, the Colts are who they want to be. The Titans are who they want to be. There are teams that have built their teams and they're, okay, this is what we wanted to be and this is what we are. The Steelers are hey, we're trying to get 2 or 3 more years out of Ben Roethlisberger over the past 2 or 3 years, and that's really hindered us because he's not the kind of quarterback, we can't build the kind of system that we need to with him there. So they really have to move him out of there at the end of the season and start over because they're not going to be who they want to be until they do that.
A game that was almost a playoff eliminator yesterday. I know Denver is still mathematically in it, but it feels like the Raiders took their soul yesterday in an ugly game.
They did, and it says something for Denver because Denver's defense is playing really well. They could run the ball really well, and they did nothing in the ground game. I wrote about that in excuse me, my article for The Athletic, that how Melvin Gordon only had 1 point, and that's how bad their running game was yesterday. And the Raiders had not been very good in that area of the field. And that's the thing. The Raiders, they have more talent than what they've been playing at. They have a higher talent level than where they've been playing. So this may speak well for them that once they have their back against the wall, they stepped up. And it's going to be scary if other team, if they do that in the AFC playoffs, because they're a team that can beat just about anybody in the AFC if they played at their talent level.
Bears go to Seattle with Nick Foles and win 25-24 in a game that, I got to say, Russell Wilson doesn't look healthy coming back from that injury.
He doesn't. He looked really bad a few weeks ago, and the finger's gotten better, and his production level's gotten better. But also, Metcalf has been banged up. Lockett has had problems. They finally got Penny in their ground game, but they really just are not they've got too many offensive injuries. And plus, again, they need to be a grinded out defensive kind of team, and they're just not. And give the Bears credit, though. I mean, you got to give them. They're fighting as hard as they have. Their offense was horrible early in the year, and this is their third quarterback they're on, and now Foles played about as well as you'd expect. So give them massive amounts of credit for playing to that level. The coach is playing like he wants to keep his job, or coach is coaching like he wants to keep his job.
Talk about Jekyll and Hyde team. The Chargers lose to the Texans, and it was kind of ugly because when your leading receiver is Justin Jackson at the end of the day, and you have Keenan Allen and other guys on your team, it just felt like the Chargers were just completely off yesterday.
That's a situation where, remember when the Bills played the Jaguars, middle of the season, week 9, I think it was, and they didn't take the Jaguars seriously, and they went to Jacksonville and got beat. And this is the same thing with the Chargers. The Chargers had that problem too, where their defense is just, it's not a shutdown defense, and the Texans are playing a lot better. Davis Mills, I bashed him when he got in the lineup earlier this year. We got like week 4. I said, what is this guy? He's the worst quarterback in the league. He's actually turning out to be I'd like them as a backup or develop him as a backup from Houston. I definitely want to have him there, and he's looking like he can win those sorts of games. And plus, I mean, the Chargers giving up 149 rushing yards to Rex Burkhead. He'd rush for 100 yards once in his entire career, and they give him 149. That's how bad the team is against the run.
Tampa Bay goes and crushes Carolina. We know the Bucs are good, but to see them beat the Carolina the way they did is probably a good sign that they're getting their groove back.
Yeah, and it says that their defense is playing that much better. Their secondary finally got healthy, and they rode their defense as much last year as their offense. I mean, that defense was as much a reason that they made the Super Bowl and won the Super Bowl as their offense last year. And this year it hasn't been the case to be getting in all kinds of shootout games. And yeah, Carolina's a bad team, but if you're Tampa, your defense should be able to shut them down, and they did. So it speaks well for them and may give them time to get healthy on offense and get back to somewhere near where they were, because they're going to have to win probably lower scoring games.
One thought on every game. The football scientist Casey Joyner joining us here on the Sports Bash on 97.3 ESPN. Josh Hennig filling in for Mike Gill. One of my bets of the NFL weekend that hit the over, that was the Jets and the Jags game. The over-under was 41.5, 42. Well, it was a 26-21 game. It was Wilson. It was Lawrence. Was it interesting, Casey?
It was. It was Carter getting 118 yards. I mean, that was pretty solid. It was... Wilson is not a good quarterback, but you got to remember, this is really only his second year against top-level competition either in college or the pros. I mean, he just hasn't been a guy who's been out there against a lot of competition. I mentioned many times that the Bill Parcells rules for grading college quarterbacks puts a lot of emphasis on the fact of, have you played a lot of big games? Have you played a lot of games? Have you started a lot of games? Because he wants to see the quarterbacks get a lot of training in college. This is where he's not been getting training in college. He's having to get training in the pros. And Lawrence is looking better without Urban Meyer there. He's got to get some, this is a really talented quarterback, and he still doesn't look like what we thought he was going to look like, because he just doesn't have the right people around him.
Oh, what a concept. Trevor Lawrence looks better without Urban Meyer hanging over his shoulder. Who would have thought that? Up to New England. Buffalo didn't just beat New England, Casey. In the fourth quarter, Patriots were leaving Gillette Stadium as Buffalo got revenge against the Patriots 33-21.
When they lost that windswept game a few weeks ago, remember McDermott comes out and says, don't give Belichick all the credit for this. But what it was is, I think the Bills realized that limited the what they wanted to do in that game, what they thought they might be able to do. and that Belichick responded better to it. So McDermott thought, yeah, he got me on this one, but believe me, I can outcoach him if you give me better circumstances. And I don't say he outcoached Belichick, but he certainly didn't. He didn't get outcoached in that game, obviously, and it hit a lot of big plays and showed that New England is a more limited team, and also showed that Mac Jones is struggling really badly. That maybe he's hitting the rookie wall at the absolute worst time.
Rams did the Eagles a favor. They took out the Vikings yesterday, and the Vikings get knocked down to 7-8, where the Rams, despite all the interceptions, they still win the game.
They did look terrible. Minnesota, by the way, that they had, before that game, they had gotten into 8 shootout games. Shootouts being where each team scores 24 or more points. Minnesota only scored 23, so it doesn't quite count as a shootout. But they were 3-5 in those contests. If you give them one more point in this game, let's say, and put it in that category, they'd be 3-6 in those games, which says two things. One, Minnesota gets in far too many shootouts, and two, their offense isn't good enough to win them. And mind you, the Rams got 30 in part because they got that return touchdown, but still, it shows you that the Rams can have the capability, even when they play poorly, to put up that kind of points. And Minnesota's offense just isn't good enough to make up for how bad their defense is.
Speaking of good offense, the Bengals, 41 points. Joe Burrow was the 4th most passing yards in an NFL game yesterday against a Ravens team who had their 3rd string quarterback. And whether Burrow wants to admit it or not, it seems like he took that Wink Martindale comment to heart.
He did. And what is it? They were up big, and they were a 3rd down play. I think it was a 2nd down play, and they threw for 50-some-odd yards on like the last drive. They didn't quite get the touchdown. They got down to like the 8-yard line. That was Cincinnati's way of saying. It reminded me of that old remember the old Sam Weish thing. You don't live in Cleveland. Yeah, or you live in Cincinnati. You don't live in Cleveland. Back in the day where he was calling them out. It looks like this rivalry is getting to that point. If Martindale wants to make his comments, and the Bengals are like, fine, you don't respect us, this is what we're going to do. But it also shows, the Ravens had tons of injuries, so they played as well as they could, given where they're at. But it also shows that, the Bengals, they have all that receiving talent we talked about. They've got Mixon. I mean, they've got a boatload of talent on that team, and they're a team that you don't want to see in the playoffs, because maybe they get into a shootout and they won't be able to win a lot of them. They could win one, and any team in the AFC does not want to see them, because they could beat any team in the AFC one Sunday.
Falcons get to 7-8 thanks to a 20-16 win over a Detroit team that had Tim Boyle at quarterback.
It speaks volume. Look, Campbell's done he needs to fix some of his game management gaffes. He needs to fix some problems there, but he's got that team playing really hard. They hit the wall before the bye week, and then they played really well after that. Atlanta, and I give them credit for where they are. I still don't know. I still don't know what to expect from them from here or the future. Is this just a bland, mediocre team? Like, I'm looking at Lions going, okay, at least their future is going to be interesting, because give Campbell some talent. Let's see what he does. The Falcons have some talent, and they're really just not doing that much with it. But that says more about how hard the Lions fought than how well the Falcons played.
Saturday games, the nightcap game. The Colts have Jonathan Taylor rush for 100 yards, and they win again. It just seems like, no offense to the Cardinals, I understand the Cardinals look horrible right now, but it seems like Frank Reich just needs to get Jonathan Taylor to 100 yards. He can win almost every game.
Frank Reich should be coach of the year. JT should be MVP. I think, I know there's a couple weeks left to go in the season, but Frank Reich, the job that he's done with that team, what he's been able to win with, what Peter King mentioned in his article today, that there was a clip on the NFL Films thing, they're doing the Hard Knocks thing, where Reich finds out that Quentin Nelson's going to be out, and he thinks about it for a couple minutes. He's like, I hate that Q is out, but I love winning in situations like this. Like, he looks at it as a challenge. You're losing his all-pro guard. This guy is a road grader. He's like, yeah, fine, we'll do it. We'll find a way. The team buys into that. They recognize that their coach understands that. And by the way, they got a fantastic GM in Chris Ballard. They gave him a game ball after the game because of the job that he did putting together the roster. They can absorb that many injuries. So kudos to the Colts for what they're doing as an organization.
Yeah, Sirianni mentioned we watched the 30 for 30 when the Bills came back down against the Houston Oilers back in the day with Captain Comeback. Sirianni took some inspiration from that game. That's Frank Reich there. For those who drew young may not remember. Green Bay at Cleveland. Sorry, it is at Cleveland was the game. Casey, I feel like the Browns are they're cooked at this point. I feel like Green Bay barely found a way to win because Cleveland just kind of handed them the game. Mayfield is, when you're playing their kind of game, mind you, you got to give them credit. So Stefanski comes in there and says, "Look, we need to play. We're going to run the ball. We're going to play good defense." It's an old, the classic formula. We're going to do that, and we're going to do well. And hey, they do well last year. Won a playoff game last year. Almost won a divisional game at Kansas City. So I mean, it works for them.
And then this year, it's not working nearly as well. It's not working poorly, but sometimes if you do that and you don't have the dominant ground game like they did last year, they got a solid ground game this year, but not dominant. And they've got a solid defense, not as good a defense, I think, as they had last year. When you're solid in both those areas, you just don't have margin for error. I think they lose that game if Mayfield only throws 2 picks and he threw 4, and a couple of them were just, you don't recognize the situation you're in, and you're putting your team at risk because you're deciding to take these risks. Not like it's just a good play by the defense or something. So Baker Mayfield either has to buy into what they're doing as an offense, or they need to find a different quarterback.
Casey, before we let you go, of course, we didn't talk to you since Thursday because of the Christmas holiday weekend. San Francisco loses to Tennessee. Listen, you're talking about a team reflecting their coach, right? Vrabel's a grinder. That team looks like a bunch of grinders.
They do, and they find a way. And it's Garoppolo though, and that's the thing. It's 7-0. They're about to go up 14-0. He forces that pass in the coverage. He had more other bad passes in there, and again, it's the I want to try and do things that I should not do. I should buy into the system, and if it, and let the system win. I think he's worried about if I let the system win, they're still going to replace me, which is like, look, if you throw interceptions, you're going to get out the door even faster. He might be a problem now, though. The news is just coming across the wire that Garoppolo has a thumb injury, and it might be it kept him out of practice today. So if he's got a thumb injury, and that's a problem for him. Maybe you're putting Trey Lance in there, and if that happens, I think San Francisco might not make the playoffs if that's the case.
Don't be surprised if Jimmy G's the starting quarterback of the Steelers next year. I'm just putting it out there.
That would be a great combination.
Casey Joyner, one thought every game. Check out all of his coverage in the Philadelphia Inquirer and The Athletic, and he'll be back later this week with Mike Gill to preview NFL Week 17 later this week. But before we let you go, Casey, tonight, Dolphins, Saints, Eagles. If the Saints lose, it helps them. If the Dolphins lose, helps the Eagles maybe get a better draft pick.
It does. It's a no-lose situation. The Saints, I mean, it says something when your coach is reaching out to Phillip Rivers and Drew Brees to try to come play this game. That's how much, if you're Ian Book, you're like, wow, you really don't have faith in me. You'd rather have guys who are retired and haven't practiced all year long. And the coach's like, yeah, and not only just one guy. If it's Brees, I kind of get it because he's been in your system. But you're going to Phillip Rivers? It's like, really? And it speaks very badly for them. I think they're going to have a very limited offense. They've got a lot of injury issues. I think the Dolphins have an aggressive defense that's going to cause the Saints problems. So I'll take the Dolphins tonight.
Yeah, Ian Book, the winningest quarterback in Notre Dame history. Can't get no respect. It's like the Rodney Dangerfield scale. I can't get no respect around here. But Ian Book.
And he should be able to run the ball well. I mean, they have that system where they could do a quarterback running, but that's you're telling your quarterback we're not going to win this game when you're doing that.
Casey, I always enjoy talking to you. Good time to check in with you, and we'll catch up with you later this week.
Sounds great. Appreciate it, man.
And of course, Casey Joyner's appearance on Mondays on the Sports Bash being brought to you by Cape Regional Health System for a healthier life. Call 609-463-CAPE. That's 609-463-CAPE for Cape Regional Health System. Josh Hennig filling in for Mike Gill here in the Matt Black Kia Studios here on the Sports Bash on 97.3 ESPN. More football talk on the other side. Jeff Kerr from CBS Sports next. Josh Hennig back here on the Sports Bash on 97.3 ESPN. We'll continue the NFL talk right now with Jeff Kerr from CBS Sports and his appearance on the Sports Bash being brought to you by the expert solar team of New Jersey, EMT Solar and Roofing and Solar Guardians. Start your solar journey today by learning more and visiting espnsolar.com. The aforementioned Jeff Kerr joins us right now here on 97.3 ESPN as the Eagles are now 8-7. Jeff, they've doubled their win total from last year.
Yeah, Josh, what do you think their record would be with Carson Wentz right now?
Not 8-7.
I don't think so either. I was getting into arguments with people on Saturday night about this. I'm like, guys, I hate to burst your bubble. Carson Wentz played okay. And I like Carson Wentz, but let's not, overanalyze this trade here. The Eagles got a first-round pick for a top 20 quarterback. That's a pretty good haul. And by the way, they're better off too because Jalen Hurts looks like he can at least be something for your franchise. They're overachieving. They have a really good offensive line. They can run the ball against anybody, and the quarterback's getting better every week. I don't know what else you want from this team this season.
Well, here's part of the problem, and I mentioned this to Casey before you came on, Jeff, and I'll bring it back to you. I think part of the problem is that you have two sets of people in this fan base, and it's all divided over Jalen Hurts, which is ironic because you think they'd be divided about the head coach, Mr. Flowers and everything, but no, they're divided about the quarterback. The problem is you have one group of people who are like, I love Jalen Hurts' leadership. I love the players follow him, that Jalen Hurts is the guy that keeps fighting and he's competitive. He's overcome so much. And you have this other group of the fan base that says Jalen Hurts sucks. He has no arm strength. He's a mobile quarterback. You can't with a mobile quarterback. And it's like you have two people who see the same game and they have completely different perspectives on the team because of the quarterback.
Yeah, and I was getting this from people yesterday too, Josh. The throw to Devonta Smith, the 46-yard pass, it was a good throw. Everybody goes, oh, it's underthrown. I'm like, you don't know what an underthrown ball is. To me, an underthrown ball is completely missing it. Like, he didn't miss. Devonta Smith tracked it well, and he threw it only to where Devonta Smith did. Josh Allen does throws like that all the time. No one criticizes Josh Allen on Twitter or anything. Well, some people do, but it's hard to find them these days because a lot of people were wrong about them. But
right.
It's funny. Like, is Jalen Hurts ever going to be Patrick Mahomes or Josh Allen or Justin Herbert? No, he's not. And that's fine. Guys like that, they don't grow on trees. I mean, Cincinnati is the luckiest team in the world. They sucked enough to get the number 1 overall pick, and they got Joe Burrow out of the deal. They don't come every year. But if you can get a player like Jalen Hurts, who has the skill set of like a Lamar Jackson, or maybe he could be a Dak Prescott, I think the Eagles can live with that. Can the Eagles win a Super Bowl with that? I don't know, but you put a good enough team around him, yeah, you can. I mean, they did it with Nick Foles.
Jeff, that's the key. The key is that people compare guys to Rodgers and Mahomes and Brady when they don't want to admit the fact that the entire league is almost the same. You stick Kirk Cousins, Jalen Hurts, Jimmy Garoppolo, old Ben Roethlisberger, Baker Mayfield. They're all basically around the same. It's just some of them are better decision makers than others at this point. And to me, it's about the team you put around the quarterback. People act like Dan Marino won Super Bowls. He never won anything. He was just a great quarterback on a bunch of average teams. So people act like the quarterback is the end-all, be-all, when at the end of the day is, guess what? The quarterback still needs help.
I hate to tell people this, before Matt LaFleur came along, Aaron Rodgers was starting to become an afterthought in this league, which is actually kind of shocking considering how good he is. But you know how good he's been under Matt LaFleur? Like, he's doing Patrick Mahomes type stuff under this guy. And people don't like Matt LaFleur. They go, oh, he wins because of Aaron Rodgers. I'm like, you ever think it coincides, like they win because of each other? Like, do you maybe think Nick Sirianni wins because of Jalen Hurts? I'll tell you what, Josh, I am so impressed by that. Jalen Hurts didn't do squat running the football yesterday and had a 100 passer rating. That's telling to me. That is the head coach.
Well, Jeff, you would have had a better passer rating if his teammates would stop dropping the ball. I mean, this is multiple games this year where Goddard and others, they can't catch a ball right in their hands.
Yeah, and they want to say it's a bad pass. Like, Patrick Mahomes throws bad passes. I watch the Chiefs every week. He don't throw these great passes, but he's a really good football player. I think Jalen Hurts is a really good football player too. He's just a different type of quarterback than a Patrick Mahomes. But why can't Jalen Hurts? Why can't this city just let this guy develop? This isn't Rodney Pete here, folks. This isn't Ty Detmer. These aren't guys that have been in the league 5 or 6 years and they're getting a shot. This is a second-year quarterback who hasn't even made 20 career starts. Can we give him 2022 before we just kind of write him off?
You forgot how the city fell in love with Bobby Hoying, too.
Yeah, for one game against the Bengals. The Bengals of all teams. Yeah. By the way, don't even get me on the last 2 years that Ray Bird's era. That team sucked.
That team was so bad, but they were like this. They were just strangely entertaining because so much bizarreness around that team.
You know what's hilarious? You still get the Andy Reid haters that say he won with Ray Rhodes players. Give me a break. Andy Reid has 250 wins. Give me a break.
Listen, man, people forget, and you want to talk about a quarterback who underthrew the ball. Donovan McNabb, how many times did he throw the ball straight into the ground? But guess what? Andy Reid found his quarterback, and he won with him. And Andy Reid found a way to salvage Alex Smith and then found his quarterback at Patrick Mahomes, and the rest is history. Listen, you find the quarterback, then you build around him. You can do some good things in the NFL.
Yeah, Josh, it was funny. During the offseason, I usually like to watch old Eagles games, just to pass the time. They're all on YouTube. So I decided to watch the 2000 season. And, yeah, McNabb was really good that year, but he was a terrible passer that entire season. I mean, he had nothing to work with, especially after Deuce. But he would throw balls into the ground. He should have had a lot of picks. He was all over the place. His accuracy was terrible. But, again, different era of football, obviously. But still, it's Andy Reid let him grow. He used his running game to his strengths, and McNabb eventually got better as the season went on. He went from a guy who could barely throw for 150 yards to a guy that threw for 300 yards at the end of the year and won the Eagles a playoff game. So why can't Jalen Hurts do that for this franchise? Just get better every week.
Donovan McNabb is also the winningest quarterback in Eagles history. That's all. But Jeff Kerr from CBS.
People don't like winning.
You know what it is? People want to win their way. It's the idea of, okay, fill in the person's not good enough. The grass is green on the other side. Then you get to the other side of the fence and you realize just the way the sun was shining on the grass made it look better.
Yeah, exactly. I go through the same thing as a basketball coach right now. I want to win offensively. But if you're not stopping anybody, you got to kind of change things around and say, okay, we got to hold this team to a certain amount. Then we can go score. But it's the same thing with Nick Sirianni. Like, Eagles fans are getting their way right now. He's running the football. And they didn't run the ball that efficiently yesterday. I mean, they only had 130 yards on like 30 carries or something like that, but they still ran the ball efficiently. And look, the Eagles are the best rushing team in the NFL. They're not disguising Jalen Hurts' ability to throw. They're just saying, look, we're not going to have this guy throw the ball 40 times. We're just not going to do it. Joe Burrow threw the football 45 times yesterday for 525 yards. Yeah, it's impressive numbers-wise, but here's the difference. The Bengals kind of had to do that because the Ravens secondary was so weak. There are times you pick your moments. It's not just cut and dry. This is what you do every single week.
Jeff Kerr, CBS Sports, joining us here on the Sports Bash on 97.3 ESPN. Josh Hennig, filling for Mike Gill on a Monday. Now, I talked about your tweet earlier. I want to bring it back up again with you, Jeff. Nick Sirianni, 8-7. Brandon Staley, 8-7. Arthur Smith, 7-8. David Culley, 4-11. Robert Saleh, 4-11. Dan Campbell, 2-12-1. Urban Meyer, fired. Nobody cares. But the rest of them, listen, Sirianni being 8-7 of the rookie coaches is pretty darn good. I will say, though, about Brandon Staley, I have a very negative opinion about him right now because I feel the Chargers have lost more games they should have won than even the Eagles have at this point.
I like Brandon Staley, the person. I think he's a great interview. I think he gives excellent explanations, but he is way too over-aggressive for me. He just, I don't mind him going for it on fourth down on certain occasions. And he looks at it as, you got to go for it all the time. Dude, you don't go for it on 4th and 3 at your own 19 when you're down 24-6. I'm sorry, that's just reeks of desperation. You're not helping your quarterback. And, I've had people argue, whoa, if the tight end would catch the ball. Well, analytics don't factor into the tight end catching the ball. That's what I don't understand about this. It's, there is a human element to football. You have to have a feel for things. Was it smart for him to go for it on 4th and 1? Yeah, it was. But what happens when the quarterback fumbles the snap or throws a high pass like Justin Herbert has done from time to time, or Donald Parham drops a football? It happens. He's just way too over-aggressive with it. Right now, and by the way, they lost to the Texans yesterday. That's a bad loss. I mean, the Eagles have a really bad loss to the Giants. So do the Chargers. But overall, Nick Sirianni and Arthur Smith, they might be the two best coaches right now because I think the Falcons are overachieving after the way they started.
Honestly, no offense to the Falcons, they're a trash roster.
That
roster, it literally is like all dudes who would have played for like Iowa or something in the Big Ten. You know what I mean? Like it's like outside of Matt Ryan and Cordell Patterson and Calvin Ridley, like who the heck Kyle Pitts, right? Who the heck on their roster is like real, like who even starts for another NFL team? I can't name anybody.
Also, Gage is having a really good year for them, but
yeah, but he's a number 2 receiver. Like he's not a number 1.
I'll tell you what, Arthur Smith's best move was he is the one coach who figured out how to use Cordell Patterson the right way. And he's a Swiss Army knife for them. I mean, it's incredible. They don't have a defense. They don't have an offensive line. They can't block to save anything. They didn't win a game at home until yesterday, and they're 7-8. It's honestly insane. What's going to happen when this guy actually gets talent around him?
It's so strange also because I feel like everyone wanted to like write off Matt Ryan for the last 3 years. And I think Matt Ryan deserves credit too. I mean, that dude literally is playing with a trash offensive line and he has 3 receivers in Cordell Patterson. Like, it's not like he's out there with like the greatest offense in the world, and they're competitive in most of their games.
It's kind of funny how the two guys the Eagles wanted, Arthur Smith and Nick Sirianni, ended up being the 2 best coaches. If you think, I mean, Brandon Staley, I think would have been a good fit here too, but I don't know if Eagles fans could take.
Listen, Jeff, I gotta say, I think Staley's overrated as a head coach. I think
Justin Herbert.
He has a great quarterback and he's got great talent on the team. His defense stinks. He's a defensive coordinator, and the Chargers' defense stinks.
Rex Burke had ran for 149 yards. I don't think the Texans have ran for 149 yards in the 2 games prior to that. It's the Chargers' run defense. That's when I kind of knew Nick Sirianni was figuring this thing out. He didn't just say it; he did it. He ran the football down that team's throat. They just didn't get the ball back in time. They never got back once they tied.
I mean, when was the last time Rex Burke had even ran for 100 yards?
I don't know if he ever ran for 100 yards.
I mean, I'm literally looking it up right now because I'm purely curious about this because I think he might have done it one other time. He did it one other time in his career. He was playing with Cincinnati back in 2017.
I was gonna say it wasn't with the Patriots. It couldn't have been with the Patriots.
No, the Patriots. They everybody rotates.
By the way, yesterday was kind of vindication for me as a Josh Allen stan because I just love seeing him torch Belichick yesterday.
Right. So what was better? Was it Josh Allen having that moment after he throws that pass and he's got that look on his face like bleep the world, or was it the fact that the Patriot fans were leaving Gillette Stadium early?
Oh, Patriot fans leaving Gillette Stadium early did for me. Look, I said this when the Cowboys beat them. I said this when they were on their run. The Patriots were frauds. They weren't that good. They were a Super Bowl contender in the AFC. But I still say after Buffalo got their butts kicked by them, Buffalo's a better team than them. They just are. Right. It's just a crazy game. That team is, and look, I'm not a Belichick fan. That team has 9 wins because of Bill Belichick. I mean, they really do. He is really overachieving with that roster, which is a shame because they spent over $250 million just to make it a 9 win.
Right, exactly. Jeff, before I let you go, so the Eagles are 8-7 right now. The 49ers lost. They're 8-7. The Vikings lost to the Rams, which the Rams looked ugly and they still won. So the Vikings are 7-8. The Falcons are 7-8. Washington's getting in fights on the sidelines. They're 6-9. So what is your perspective on the playoff teams that are not division leaders right now?
Well, I think if you're an Eagles fan, you got to root for the Dolphins tonight. Plain and simple, let this thing go down to between the Eagles, the Vikings, and the 49ers. And I think the 49ers just can't get out of their own way. I mean, they're going to play the Packers next week. The Packers are still playing for home field advantage. I don't see Green Bay getting swept by Minnesota this year. The way Washington looked last night, look, I'm not even impressed by that Dallas win. I'm not. The Dallas Cowboys, this is how powerful they are at full throttle. Yeah, against a bad football team. Do that against the Packers. The Dallas Cowboys always do this in December, Josh. I'm telling you. They always have a big win against a mediocre team or a team that's kind of out of the playoffs. Remember when they did this to the Rams a couple of years ago? When they were like 10-6 or whatever they were. And then the Rams beat them in the playoffs a couple of weeks later. I don't know. Washington's a bad team. Minnesota, they can't get out of their own way. I don't see the Saints beating the Dolphins tonight with Ian Book. I just don't. So you got to root for the Dolphins tonight if you're an Eagles fan. I think it's ultimate. I think the 49ers and the Eagles are going to get those last 2 seeds. Oh, but Jimmy G's hurt now. So, I mean, you know what's crazy, Josh? He was going to actually get the 5 seed. How is that possible?
They could. Now that I mentioned, now I'm thinking through the
If Cardinals
scenarios.
lose out and they win out, they get
The Cardinals are falling apart, Jeff.
Yeah, I mean, I really hope they beat Dallas to kind of put them in their place this week, but I don't see it happening. I mean, I think Dallas runs the. I mean, Dallas could very well run the table. I don't think they'll get the number 1 seed, but and I'm hoping they flex that game tonight and have the Green Bay game before the Eagles game.
Jeff Kerr, CBS Sports, joins us here on 97.3 ESPN every Monday, day after football weekend. Jeff, always appreciate you jumping on in the conversation. Take care of yourself, all right?
Yeah, sounds good, Josh. I'm telling you what, I'm really getting into the playoff stuff now. I'm into this when it's like week 10, but now that it's almost here, I'm finally starting to like see the light at the end of the tunnel. I get to breathe a little bit. So I think the excitement meter goes a lot of, especially with the AFC. It's like number 2 through number 13 are separated by like 2 games, and there's only one playoff spot clinched in that conference.
Listen, I can promise you one thing. Broncos are out of the playoffs. I know mathematically they're still in it, but they're out. They're done.
Oh, yeah, I got right about it. Yeah, Broncos are done. The Browns are still in it because of their division. Dolphins lose tonight, they're done. But Dolphins win tonight, they're 7 seed. How insane is that?
So strange. Jeff, have a good one, man.
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks, Josh.
Of course, Jeff Kerr's appearance being brought to you by the Solar Team at EMT Solar Roofing and Solar Guardian. Start your solar journey today by learning more and visiting espnsolar.com for the expert solar team of EMT Solar. I'm Josh Hennig, filling in for Mike Gill. We'll wrap up the show on the other side here on 97.3 ESPN FM, the 97.3 ESPN mobile app. It's free thanks to First Bank of Seattle City. We are live on YouTube at 97.3 ESPN.
Now, back to the Sports Bash on 97.3 ESPN.
All right, Josh Hennig wrapping up the Sports Bash here on 97.3 ESPN. Of course, Sports Bash has been brought to you by Matt Blatt Nissan. The all-new Matt Blatt Nissan is now open on the Black Horse Pike at Egg Harbor Township next to Home Depot. Visit them online at mattblattnissan.com. A lot of great conversation today. I'll be back tomorrow on the Sports Bash for more football conversation here on 97.3 ESPN. I was going to say take the under in the Dolphins and the Saints game. The problem is the over-under is 37.5. I'm feeling like that might not be the best advice to give you guys. Honestly, you might be better off just doing a same-game parlay with under 42.5 and combine it with Alvin Kamara for over on the rushing yard. I think that might be a safer way to go. FanDuel Sportsbook, promo code Hennig, signing up on the app. Gambling problem, call 1-800-GAMBLER.